Baha'is of the Covenant, I call them. I don't know if that's right, because if you ever watch MCAT, they're on there on Friday nights, and they say the most amazing things. And I've always wanted to get them down here, and now they are. Yeah, let's see. Tonight, Neil Chase of the International Council of the Baha'is of the Covenant will speak about the changes coming on the wheel of progress and how we are in the midst of a world civil war. That's just a tip of any kind of iceberg, but I put together a couple of the things that we said over the phone. Second International Baha'i Council audience. All right. Maybe we'll even find out what that means. So, okay, you're on the air now. We're doing it. Now, I wrote on the back of the card from a car dealer. Let's see, I want to talk about the world according to the Baha'is, and that they hold forth on Friday nights at MCAT. That's at the local access television station in Missoula. So anybody on the internet can listen in to the Friday night MCAT show.
We are the first show on all cable access throughout the United States, 5 Canadian provinces, Alaska and Hawaii, to be live on the internet with the audio. And unless somebody else comes forth and takes the lead with the video too, it looks like we're pretty close to that too right now.
Oh, amazing. Using that technology. You said faith before, the Baha'i faith. Now, some people would say that your use of the faith is more political, and so that you're just kind of using the Baha'i faith, because there's another branch of it, as a umbrella for something that's more political than it is spiritual. Now, how does that break down? It seems to be based on rational proof.
Exactly.
What reasonable people would agree on if they weren't all caught up in their own stuff. Which is a different kind of experience of like rapture.
Yeah, nobody's experienced that since Jesus of Nazareth got hung on the cross.
Oh, yeah. What? Nobody's experienced what?
Well, he didn't walk around town saying, I'm God, and get on your knees and have an elated experience. He gave forth rational proof. In Jerusalem, amongst the people and the masses that were reasonable, that were able to see his evidences, came forward, and that's why they got rid of him. He was a problem. But today's not an age of martyrdom, so we're not really worried about that type of thing.
Well, martyrs, we haven't had one person juice the whole world, or the whole known Western world at the time, anyway.
Well, the founding fathers of this country set it up so that if somebody did come forth with rational proof for their faith, they were in line with the Constitution of the United States. And that's why we love America, and we're able to do this here in America, and we're for the Constitution and the legal status of America. You couldn't do this anywhere else. When the Baha'i faith began in the Middle East, it was the greatest religious slaughter and martyrdom in modern world history.
So we're talking
up until the Waco
freedom
massacre.
Of religion. Oh, don't be so broad. How am I going to pin you down to anything if you say so many things to talk about at once? The
20,000.
We're talking about. Wait. We're going to get to that because you're talking about freedom of religion, and you're saying that the Baha'i faith started in Islamic countries as a separate thing called Baha'is, and then they were slaughtered.
It started in Jerusalem. That's where the throne of King David was. But Nebuchadnezzar, that was the king of Iraq.
This is Old Testament stuff.
That's right. Took this lineage captive back to Babylon in the Arab lands. This lineage of David. And Baha'u'llah is a direct male sperm descendant of King David. And when Islam rose up later, that's
Jewish.
That's right. And that's how it happens to come out of the Muslim world. Whereas half the Jews at the time of Ezra went back to Jerusalem. So Jesus' line from David was in Jerusalem. But the king seated on the throne of David stayed in Babylon with over 1 million Jews, and they remained there under Islamic captivity. And so the Baha'i faith comes out of the world of Islam, but its roots goes back to that ancient root of Jesse, or that root of David spoken of in the Bible.
Well, okay, so how does this go with the Quran and Muhammad? Muhammad was later than all this.
Well, there's a real big difference between Muhammad and a modern Muslim. Probably as much difference between a modern Christian and Jesus. Well, I'm sure Jesus and Muhammad would get along.
Muslims, and then there's the other Muslims.
And there's Catholics
Shittites.
And Protestants and 100 Years' Wars.
Yeah. But we know that the Shiites are the ones that are going around trying to do religious war and subjugate people, right?
They're more fanatical today but certain groups of Sunnis are fanatical. They believe Sheikh Rahman, that they tried to involve in the trade tower bombing. He might be Sunni. I don't know. Maybe he's Shiite. Not sure.
Yeah, it seemed, well, I don't know. I can't, all is all, but it seemed like it's the Shiites that I would be worried about.
We've got Christian groups here in Idaho that are militant religious fanatics.
Oh yeah, I got no happiness with Christians, but I want to
Then we
get
have
back
Jews
to
like
this,
Kahana High that's racist also.
Yeah.
It's bad news when people take over religion for political gain and bring militant religious fanaticism into it. And unfortunately, that has happened in the Baha'i faith. There was a hostile takeover in the Baha'i faith. On November 4th of 1957, they murdered the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi. And 40 years from that date was November 4th of 1997. And the vice president of the Second International Baha'i Council sent Bill Clinton a letter telling him that this would be the pivotal date for entering into the final stage of World War III. And he warned him that he can't judge the current crisis in the Gulf in the news media. And he warned him that if he did this, eye for an eye. Now look who's being judged in the news media this week instead of the courts.
Well, okay, and this is the kind of rational and numerological and, you say, okay, this means this and this means this and this is happening because of that. So there are some things are, you're trying to, it's like Freud, you got things all set up you got your ducks in a row.
Yeah, Freud was into the Jewish Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah talked about the evil inclination, and it talked about hidden motives, and he was able to base a lot of his psychology with the ego and the id from the ancient tradition of the Jewish Kabbalah.
I think this is going to be like this, audience. We're just going to go all over, but it's fascinating for me, and I hope you're listening too.
Well, we actually have a linear message to give tonight, too.
Okay, well, we got to make sure we do it. So let's go back to King Solomon and to the Baha'is, or the Jewish tribal peoples that stayed in Babylon. Okay, under the and so the ruling culture was Islamic. Now, was there Islam way back then? Nebuchadnezzar.
The throne of David stayed in captivity from the time of Nebuchadnezzar in 600 BC throughout the Persian dynasties of Cyrus the Great, which conquered Babylon, and the Seleucid dynasty, the Parthian, and the Sasanian dynasty, all the way up until Ali, the successor and establisher of Muhammad. Like Jesus had Paul and Moses had Joshua, Muhammad had Ali, that was his establisher. And Ali met the descendant of David, seated on David's throne, named Bostanai, and gave him a daughter from the line of Zoroaster named Dara in marriage. And Baha'u'llah's descended from that union. And Muhammad commanded all the Muslims to protect and honor the exilarch, which means the exiled monarch of King David. And they were to pay tribute to this person and respect his genealogy chart and his testimony that he had with the names, professions, and entitlements of all the descendants of David on this, which still exists today. And they asked the imams of Shiite Islam.
It's a pretty high family.
They asked the imams of Shiite Islam by what authority they ruled. With the majority of Muslims were Sunni. By what authority did the Shiite imams have?
Because there was the two sons of Muhammad or something like that.
Well, Muhammad had only a daughter, Fatima, and he gave her in marriage to his cousin Ali. And Ali became the first imam. And he had two sons with Fatima, Hassan and Hussein, which are the second and third imams. And there's 12 imams total that are descended from Hussein. And the Sunnis said, let's elect a successor. So whereas the Shiites go through an appointed successor through
once again, seed.
Through Muhammad's daughter, though. The seed of the woman, through the imams, see? And whereas the Sunnis wanted to elect a successor. So the Sunnis recognize Ali as the fourth elected successor, whereas the Shiites recognize him as the first appointed successor. And Ali let the other three before him rule electedly because he knew that it was just a matter of time before he'd be elected anyway, he'd straighten it out. So Muawiyah, the son of Abu Sufyan, had put Ali to death and took over. And the Sunnis established a barbaric dynasty called the Umayyads, which then made war on Rome and all the other nations in an offensive way and breaking Muhammad's rule. Muhammad gave a teaching called jihad, which most Americans have heard as holy war. And this is where the Christian concept of crusade comes from. The holy war that Muhammad talked about, the greater jihad, really means struggle. And the greater struggle is the struggle against self, because we have an inclination to be greedy and to politicize things and to make money off of the religion, the way the Jewish clergy in the time of Jesus did, the way the Christian clergy do today, the way the Muslim clergy do. And so Muhammad forbid them to do this. And the lesser jihad was if somebody attacked you to rape your wife and kill your kids or burn down the village, you were allowed to defend yourself with a sword or any type of weapon for protection, which is what Jesus told his apostles to do. He told them to sell their coats and buy swords. They each brought back 2 swords, a long sword for fighting and a short dagger for up close. And he says, we have 2 swords. And Jesus said, is it enough? And he says, yes. So it's the same teaching of Jesus that Muhammad gave. But when the Islam was corrupted, the mainstream of Islam broke his word and had offensive warfare against the neighboring countries.
You're saying that's the Sunnis?
Yeah, they were the ones that started that. They murdered all the imams. So Shiite Islam was very pure for the rule of the 12 imams. And in 260 lunar years after the coming of Muhammad, the 12th imam disappeared. And they had a prophecy that this 12th imam would return, the way the Jews are waiting for the return of Elijah on the last part of the Old Testament, the way the Christians are waiting for the return of Jesus. So all the religions, the way the Buddhism's waiting for the coming of the Maitreya, they have the coming of this promised figure or promised one, or the return of somebody that lived before. So there's a lot of speculation on what this is about and what this means. But Jesus said John the Baptist was the return of Elijah. And he explains this. Yeah, in the Gospels of Matthew in chapter 11, and especially, he tells you John is Elijah if you're willing to accept it. Well, 6 million and more Jews are not willing to accept that. And they see Christianity as a cult that's gotten way out of control. And they even took the prophecies Jesus based his faith on, his rational proofs, such as the date in the book of Daniel. In the Jewish Bible, the book of Daniel is not in the prophet section. They moved it to the writing section. But they haven't changed what Daniel wrote. But some Christians know of this date that Jesus gave. And the interpretation of these dates gives rise to millennial fever and different crises when we come to these prophetic dates, such as we're at the year 2000 now, or the expectations at the year 1000 or the year 1260 AD or 1290 AD or 1335. Columbus added 490 years to 1000 AD, you got 1490. And this is why we've had a history of this. So there's a whole jumble of things that needs to be untangled. So the common person would be able to see the simple message that lays behind a lot of the hullabaloo that's been created around these different things.
Well, where does prophecy come from? Why do you believe in it? And then another question that doesn't have anything to do with that one is, aren't you scared of the Shiites today with all this conservative fundamentalism?
I don't think there's reason to be afraid of anybody.
Don't you think that if they get too much of a foothold, it's going to help? We're going to have to fight them.
The worst thing that could happen.
I can't believe I'm saying that. But the whole thing is, we're going to have to liberate all these cultures from these anal men that are trying to keep women behind closed doors and trying to keep everybody in subjugation.
Well, the most progressive Islamic country is the nation of Iraq. The women sit on parliament. It's both Shiite and Sunni.
Yeah, but it hasn't been swept over like Afghanistan or what they're trying to do in Morocco and stuff.
We're not. We support the United States government. Supports the Taliban.
We'll get to that.
In Afghanistan, one of the most ruthless Shiite groups is supported by the United States, whereas they make war on the democracies over there.
I know. We haven't.
Okay.
We haven't. But I want to tell everybody.
Okay.
But we're not there yet. I was just more talking about because you said the Shiites were more pure.
During the life of the imams. And then what happened is, the prophecy was that in 1,000 years the imam would return. So in the year was 1260 on the Muslim calendar, 1,000 years from 260 on the Muslim calendar. Muslims are peculiar. Their calendar starts with Muhammad, whereas the Christians are peculiar and their calendar starts with Jesus. Well, 1260 on the Muslim calendar is the same as the year 1844 AD on the Christian calendar. And it was at that time that the same thing that happened to the Jews when John the Baptist appeared amongst them and started to prepare the way for the coming of Jesus Christ on his first coming. It took that nation by surprise. And Herod and the high priests had problems. The Roman Empire got embroiled in this. It led to the following of false messiahs such as Manaheim and Bar Kokhba, the horrible slaughter of the Jews at Masada, Titus burning down Jerusalem, and eventually the fall of the Roman Empire. So this is what happened in Islam. Where's the Ottoman Empire of Islam now? It fell. And there was great religious slaughter in Persia in this time. And the Shiites became extremely virulently corrupt in opposition to the return of the same scenario in their country, with Baha'u'llah fulfilling prophecies in not just Islam but Christian holy book and the Old Testament, New Testament, for the second coming of Christ. And this is what took place in that part of the world. And now the Ottoman Empire is gone. But the Baha'i World Center came to the west in the Rocky Mountains. And the head of the Baha'i faith lives right here in Missoula, Montana. He's in charge of everything.
Who's that?
He's the son of Shoghi Effendi. As I said, Shoghi Effendi was murdered in 1957.
And he's part of the lineage of King Solomon?
That the son of Shoghi Effendi is a council. And the president of the council is descended from King Solomon and King David, seated on David's throne. And the body of the council is going to be elected by all the people of the world. But right now it's the appointment of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, spoken of in the book of Revelation. And the men and women on that body is 50-50. Then the council each has a vote of one. And the president...
And they're going to elect apostles, or what's this apostle business?
Right now, it's in an appointed phase, that the people that are on the body of it are appointed. But as the majority of people in the world come into the awareness of this coming change, the body will be elected by all the nations of the world. And the people that are serving on it now, unless they're elected back on there for some reason, will step off of that. And the men and women that are elected to it will serve on this council. And this council is a gift to the people of the world from God to have a world spiritual democracy, including all peoples, all nations, all backgrounds, all creeds, without prejudice and egalitarian. And
what about, are you going to stop the war on drugs?
That the war on drugs, that according to the best known people, such as Gene Duffy, that sat on the Drug Task Force Commission in Arkansas, where the drugs were being funneled in the Iran-Contra scam, as well as Kevin Warren of the African American Center for Social Justice in Los Angeles, where the Mercury Times Chronicle broke the article on crack being sold by the CIA in Los Angeles, that most drugs have been coming in through George Bush's offshore oil wells of Zapata oil. And the reason this works is that if you take a speedboat or a boat out to an offshore oil well and then come back to shore, you don't go through customs. It's considered local. And when the oil freighters come in from overseas to go to those, and then they go away, they don't get searched by customs because it's international. So they're able to bring in this stuff internationally onto the oil platforms, and then in other ways through the army and flight planes, and then bring the black powder goes south to South America and the white powder comes north. And the war on drugs is not really a war on drugs. It's really an opium war fought against the American people by its certain 1% of the population that has 99% of the wealth, that's weakening the infrastructure of America and dumbing down the system and keeping the people ignorant. And if there was going to be a real war on drugs, they'd shut down those oil platforms and take away the Zapata company of George Bush and the other cronies that are in on this. And all of this, by the way, you can read about on our webpage. We have links to what happened there in Arkansas. There's a videotape that Gene Duffy put out, Obstruction of Justice, that gets into all the details. We've shown it on our program. It's amazing. It's true. It's not politically oriented, and it's not put out by vicious Republicans like the Clinton Chronicles. We have another videotape by Kevin Warren and Mike that worked for the government that explains the history of the British deliberately growing drugs and using them to destabilize China in the Opium Wars. So this isn't something that hasn't happened before. It's something that's a standard operating procedure, using a war where a government is the main sponsor of drugs. Now, Baha'u'llah, being cognizant of his mission in Persia, saw that the British, being Persia's between Britain and China, it's in the middle of things, saw how the West was using opium to conquer these other countries and deplete societies. So he put bans on this. And we also know that if somebody's flying an airplane or operating on somebody's liver, they shouldn't be impaired while they're doing this. Today, we consider drinking and driving. Somebody getting into a car, if they're drunk, they're supposed to be educated enough to that be a lethal weapon. They can be charged with attempted murder and stuff like this if they're drunk and get into their car. But in America, you can drink. In America, you can drive. But drinking and driving is now you're crossing the line where you might be infringing on the rights of others. So in some of these instances, we can't do two things at once. See? And I don't want somebody in Congress making laws to govern me when they're drunk off their butt. See? Can you say butt on the radio?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So some of these people, there should be stricter laws for those working in government. If somebody's going to be a public servant, we want them to have a stricter standard. If somebody's going to be a brain surgeon or whatever, or neurosurgeon.
Well, not on their off time. I thought you were saying that when you're operating on somebody, you better have your shit together.
When they're operating.
But when they're not, you can go home and do libertarian things.
I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to do that, but if they're going to function full time in that capacity as a public servant and as a public representative.
Home. I mean, even those politicians
You can't go home again, Rich.
Once a politician, man, at least during your term. I guess, well, we don't want to go there. Well, okay, now, astute listeners, you actually did get an answer to my question. Now, what's up with this prophecy business? Why do you believe in prophecies? What's going on? You've got some religious spice and some explaining, how you think things are going to fall out, and it seems obvious that you think that the Baha'u'llah view of things is the most complete and also the one that's somehow going to work. And this goes back to why prophecies. Where do they come from, and how come you believe in them?
Okay, this is real good. Now, one of the disciplines in the social sciences. Social science was a science started in France by a man that, and H.G. Wells in his outline, A History of the World, happened to notice that thousands of years after the fact, that we have mainstreams in civilization. That great civilizations that built the pyramids in Egypt, or the ancient empires of Babylon, or that of Angora and China, or by the Yangtze River or the Indus River Valley, or the Nile and the Tigris and Euphrates, that there's an ebb and a wane to the mainstreams in civilization. Civilizations reach their zenith in history, and then they fall again.
Dust to dust. Yeah.
And so they said, we need to look at this scientifically. We need to come up something like the exact science of mathematics and the physical science of physics. We need to have a social science. We need to have a political science. We need to have a science of how to approach this. Well, in H.G. Wells' book, which anybody can get at the library, An Outline of History, he puts together a global thing, and he happens to see that all the civilizations that have been great can be traced back, each one, to a single personage that brought forth what they claimed to be, this personage claimed, was a revelation direct from the creator of the entire universe and everything in it. And that this person was actually, on earth, a representative of this infinite, invisible essence that governs and created the laws that govern the physical world, and that they could help order society in a way which would be free of crime and prejudice and injustice, where you got love and mercy and these things.
Romulus and Remus?
Pardon me?
Romulus and Remus? Is that who they were?
No.
For Rome?
No.
All right, you got names.
Okay, names. So in the ancient civilizations, the book of Genesis talks about 4 rivers: the Nile, the Gihon, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Paisan, the Indus. These are the 4 river valley civilizations where we say written history began. And the Egyptians say their god, or it comes down to its pagan form, a god man named Atum Ra, Ra meaning the sun, Atum, A-T-U-M, where we get our word atom from, A-T-O-M, was the one that did this. And he gave them their civilization, their science.
Organized, there were people, but they were they didn't have it together until...
They were tribal, and they were hunter-gatherers. He gave them agriculture. He gave them...
and that was somehow better.
What?
That was better.
But he gave them, these people were smart before the coming of these ones. They knew that they didn't create themselves. And they knew they got tired. When they ate food, they became stronger. When the sun came out, it was warm. When it went down, it was cold. So they were nature worshipers. They're very smart people. They knew that there was something more powerful than them. So they worshiped the things that gave them life: the sun and the moon and the stars and the animals and the plants that they ate. And they felt that when you ate meat and you drank blood of an animal, you felt nutritious and strong. So they felt you were taking on the spirit of these things in nature. And certain plants did different things to the people, and they had spirits in them. So when Adam came, he said, "Why are you worshiping the things of the created when there's a creator?" And they said, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, there's this infinite invisible essence that created the universe and everything in it that you can't see with your five senses. But us being human, we have something different from the animal, the power to think in the abstract. And this is represented by a snake.
Yeah, and that's how we worship him. Keep going, keep going. This is great.
And this is represented by a snake. And that we're supposed to hold, Jesus said, be wise as the serpent, have your heart as peaceful as the dove.
What is represented as the snake?
The intellect of the abstract thought.
Okay.
That's why there's two serpents around the medical caduceus. This represents the intellect, reflection. And so he said that when this intellect becomes materialistic and greedy, it crawls on its belly like a snake on the ground. And it's worse, the person becomes worse than the animal. They will learn the secrets of metallurgy, and instead of making a plow to plow the field so the people have more free time, then they will make an axe, not to chop a tree to build a house, but to chop their friend in half, to make war. And he says, but this intellect can be used to worship and give thanks to the fact that we're here on earth and there's such a diversity of life and people and cultures and foods and tastes and flowers and smells and sights, like in the spring when the birds chirp and things. And he told them their purpose in life was to know and love the fact that they were created by this creator. And that the greatest way to say thanks was not by giving him money or worshiping him to be God, but by becoming self-empowered so that they would be in the image of God. That each person would be in the image of God.
Why weren't they already?
We're in the image of the animal, Rich. We have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, mouth, and arms and legs. My little puppy dog at home has that.
What does it mean to be in the image of God?
Okay, it means that we should all look like him. No. It means that the image of God's invisible image, but it's the image of love, mercy, justice, generosity, concord, fidelity, and harmony. It's these spiritual qualities and attributes.
What does concord mean?
Are the image of God. Oh, it's when people get along, when they have concord. And if there's harmony, it's another version of harmony, but it's about a group of diverse people getting together and having felicity and concord.
But doesn't it? But
amicable.
That presupposes that the people weren't living that way before.
No, they were living like animals. If I was hungry and Dave had some food and I didn't, and I said, "Could I have some?" and he said, "No," I'd kill him and eat his food. And this was the law of the land.
That seems to be happening more after Adam.
It was happening before. But now it's happening.
We aren't going to be able to go there.
But now it's happening today, as you point out, with high technology. See?
Yeah.
If I wanted his food back then, or somebody else's, I'd maybe pick up a stick or a rock. But now I can sit at home, stay up all night in the Pentagon, and make an underground burrowing thermonuclear whistle to burrow 300 feet underground and kill Saddam Hussein in his bunker and nuke the entire country of Iraq because I want the oil to grease the wheels of the beast in America. And this is how America has become greedy. The beast in the book of Revelations, a lot of people heard of this, my dog at home's a beast. She's very cute. Her name's Rosie. And she has 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, mouth, arms, and legs. And she doesn't have a forehead. Her head goes flat back, see? So she's a beast. And she can think, but only about the material things. She can't think about those invisible things because she doesn't have the hardware. Mm-hmm. But we have that hardware, and it was given to us.
But if we don't use it, we're the beast.
If we don't use it, we're worse than the beast. We're worse than the animal. Rosie's not going to build a nuclear bomb and nuke the neighbor's yard because that dog took her bone. She's going to bark a little bit, and you know what I mean?
Get over it.
That's right. So this is the problem. So the ancient cultures, in India, they say Manu, which means to think in the abstract, was their founder. In Babylon, it's Anu. And in Egypt, he's called Mena, or Manu, same thing. But his spiritual name was Atum Ra, and Moses was raised to be the next pharaoh and called him Adam. And Thoth in Egypt was called Seth. And Ta in Egypt, in Greek, was called Vulcan. He was the fashioner of all metals. His name was Ta Vulcan. And in the Bible, he's called Tubal-Cain.
So somebody came, half man, half God, and people really dug his charisma and decided to become agrarian in these 4 different places, and that was the beginning of this culture?
Well, actually, no. In the book of Genesis, it says, when it talks about Adam, it says, let us replenish the earth. So replenish means to put more back where something once was that was taken away. Like if I drank all the water in my cup, I'd ask this to be replenished. But if I never had any to begin with, I'd say, could you please fill this, for the first time?
So what does that mean?
There were civilizations before Adam that were wiped out by, there's remains of nuclear disaster on the earth, such as the stone walls in Scotland that are fused in 3 feet, the green glass in the Gobi Desert in China. The geologists had no idea what formed that until the Chinese set off their nuclear weapons, and it revitrified the Gobi Desert sand into green glass. There's bodies up there that are 50 times above the radiation level of what normal should be, that are 4,000 years old or older. The war at the time of Krishna was an atomic war, the Mahabharata war. They had airplanes, combustion engines. They called their airplane the Vimana, the flying machine. They had the Agni weapon, the fire weapon, and they wiped themselves out. And so then Krishna taught detachment. All this
isn't just like
out of
Krishna's
artifacts.
Tools. Yeah, it was this. Oh, okay.
And this is documented by out-of-place artifacts that archaeologists know about.
I love it.
So we're in a situation.
Goes way back.
So then H.G. Wells sees that Moses progenerated a civilization take Arabia, greatest modern example. There were 300 warring and independent tribes. They used to perfume their beards with camel's urine and file their teeth sharp to eat raw meat. They hated their women.
Which people are they?
Arabs in Arabia before Muhammad. They would strangle their baby daughters at birth or leave them in the desert to die. If a father died, the sons would divvy up each other's mothers and could beat them, sell them, kill them, whatever they wanted to do with them. They were chattel. And their delicacy was to find raw, rotten meat laying like roadkill on the side of the road in the desert and eat that. They were totally barbaric. There was no written language. And they were horrible. Like I said, they perfumed their beards with camel's urine, the women with their hair with camel's urine. Muhammad was born amongst these people. 100% illiterate, couldn't read, couldn't write. They had no civilization in there. The desert was so inhospitable, no Christian missionary could get in there and come out alive. So they remained uncivilized in the Arabian Peninsula.
Unchristianized.
Unchristianized too, and with no science, and uncivilized with no science and technology, killing their women. I don't find to be something I'd say would be better.
Well, it must have worked. I mean,
they had cannibalism.
They did that for a while.
They had cannibalism.
Must have worked.
Hey, if you're a woman, then
I know it's hell. I don't want it to be that way.
So when Muhammad, in his lifetime,
but I didn't want them to be Christians either. But we'll talk about that.
In his lifetime, Muhammad united all these 300 warring and independent tribes, and within 100 to 200 years after his lifetime, the greatest civilization on the world of the Islamic Empire rose up, and it was spiritual, and it didn't create war, and they created the university system. The sheriff comes from the Sharif of Mecca. The mayor in our town comes from the Emir. We have an Islamic government in America. We have the Arabic numerals, the Arabic science and technology, medicine, astronomy comes from Islam. This is the greatness of it. They took some of the knowledge of the East and developed it. They gave us the zero and the decimal point, aluminum, alcohol, all these things that begin with AL comes from Islam. The dome on the top of our Capitol building, that architecture. And they became great, and they started treating their women better. But then they became corrupt, and they started treating their women bad again.
How did Muhammad do that? I mean, was he that? I mean, how did everybody get sprinkled with fairy dust and come around?
This is the whole question behind this was why prophecy. And so H.G. Wells in his outline sees Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus, Muhammad, that these people have progenited civilization, even going back to ancient Babylon. And he's angry about it because he was an atheist. And he hated his discovery. But a scientist is supposed to be objective and look at the facts. Well, these certain ones, when Jesus was here, he said, I'm different than these 113 other people that was alive in his day claiming to be the Messiah. They said, what makes you different? He says, I fulfill prophecy. They don't. And he himself, Jesus, when he walked among the people, had them read from their Old Testament and showed them where his name was prophesied of in Isaiah, his date in Daniel, his address to be born in Bethlehem from Micah, 500 years before he was born, he gave his mission. That's why Christians, true Christians, would rather be fed to the lions by the Romans than even give up their faith at that time. Muhammad was prophesied by Jesus in the Gospel of John by name. Jesus said, after me will come Ahmad. Okay? And this was his Arabic name for Muhammad. And it's been translated into Greek as Parakletos, which means lawyer, counselor, comforter in English. And when the Romans wanted to get rid of the Muslims rising, they had Christian armies, the Syrians. They sent them in there to kill them, but blood is thicker, than water. And so the Muslims came out of the desert with the Bible in one hand and the Quran in the other. They showed them where Muhammad's name was in the gospel, and these people converted overnight to accepting Muhammad based on the fact that his name was prophesied of. In the Rig Veda, the oldest Hindu literary work of religion, Krishna is mentioned by name, but he was born thousands of years later. In the Bhagavad Gita, he names Buddha by name, and Buddha came 1,000 years later. Jesus is named in the gospel in the book of Isaiah. So we see a cultural pattern through books that are not Baha'i books. The greatest example,
the whole world.
That's right, all throughout the world, east and west, but especially Jesus is a good example, as well as Muhammad. That this great civilization came from one person that was taught by no man, and Muhammad said he had a revelation direct from God. And that's what Moses claimed, and Jesus claimed. So we have to be fair. I didn't know what prophecy was when I first got shanghaied into the Baha'i faith. I went through a class, and I found out that Jesus, the first thing I did was I went through the purpose of life, and then I was shown the prophecies Jesus fulfilled. No Christian ever showed me that. I was raised Jewish, and I looked at Jesus' own explanation of the Old Testament. I was raised Jewish, where he explained in the Gospel of Matthew where his name was, where his place was. And then the date of Daniel was shown, and his mission to die for the forgiveness of sins. And by the way, Rich, do you have a concept what the word sin means?
Tell me.
It comes from a Hebrew sporting event. It's an archery term, it means to miss the bullseye. And Jesus said, you always miss the bullseye. Every time God sends one of us, Jesus said, a manifestation with a revelation direct from God, you miss him. And he comes with like 113 wannabes. He says, well, I'm going to do something so you'll be to forgive this missing the mark, this sin forever. I'm willing to show, Jesus said, that he was prophesied by name, his prophesied date, his address and mission, and die for it, to die at the prophesied date. So when Paul went to Greece and Rome, he said, you got that Jewish Bible there? They go, sure, we got it in Greek, the Septuagint. You go, we had it for about 100 years. You go, pull that out, blow some dust off it. Turn to the book of Isaiah. There's Jesus' name. It says, a virgin will conceive and bear forth Emmanuel, which is Hebrew and the Greek word Jesus. And it will be from the house of David, King David. And then he says, turn to Micah, 500 years before Jesus was born. So he'll be born in Bethlehem. He was. It says he will be crucified, cut off, and crucified in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, after 70 weeks of years, which is 490 days. And according to the text of the Bible, each day is a year. It's 490 years. Isaac Newton wrote a paper on this, so some Christians know about this prophecy. So anyway, Paul showed this to the Greeks and Romans. He says, oh my God, how come the Jewish people don't accept Jesus when their own book prophesies him? We believe. And they were grafted in spiritually for belief. And that was the birth of true Christianity, which ended on 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. So it ended pretty quick. But
How did it end?
Well, that there was a big fight that broke out in Christianity. It broke into two main groups. One group, led by the Bishop of Rome, and other ones said, we have to sell Jesus as God. And the other group said, we can't claim Jesus as God because he said there's, in the book of Timothy, there's but one God, the Creator. And then there's mankind. And there's the intermediary between God and man. He's not half man and half God. He's not God at all, but he's more than just man. He's an intermediary. The same way we have the intellect, but we're in the animal body, or the animal has the five senses, but the plant doesn't, but it grows and reproduces. The plant has the vegetable spirit of growth and reproduction, but it's made of minerals. So the plant, we could say, is the mineral that grows and reproduces. We could say the vegetable is, the animal is the vegetable with five senses. We could say the person's the animal with the intellect, see? But we don't. And so the manifestation, which none of us here is this manifestation, not me, not Dr. Leland Jensen, none of us. We're just followers. We're just all equal, all of us on earth, men and women, all of us. And this manifestation is different than us, like a TV set's different, has special equipment. And they receive the thought of God, and they give it in a revelation with the laws, ordinances, and teachings for what our day and age needs. And it's progressive. And Baha'u'llah isn't the last one. There'll be another one in 1,000 years. The Bible teaches progressive revelation. It says Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses. So leading up to Jesus. But then the church tells us it stopped with Jesus. But Jesus tells us that he'll come again. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean, he will come again? Will he be reincarnated? Will he come down out of the sky in a cloud? How will he return? Now that's subject, you could say, to interpretation. Well, did you know that Jesus interpreted himself what it means to return. Because the Jews were waiting not just for a Messiah to appear to them for the first time, but for somebody who had lived amongst them to return. I was raised on this. Elijah, he lived 900 years before Jesus. They were waiting for that same person to come again. Jesus said it was John the Baptist, that he fulfilled prophecy for Elijah, that he wasn't actually the same physical body. He didn't come down out of the sky in a whirlwind in a flaming chariot, that he fulfilled prophecy for us. They asked John, are you Elijah? And John said he wasn't. And Jesus said he was. John was saying he wasn't because he wasn't the reincarnation of Elijah. He wasn't insane either, thinking he was Napoleon or something, with his hand, in his thing. But that he fulfilled prophecy. So what we have is that we all of a sudden are exposed from Jesus and these other teachers to a concept that God, this creator, has a plan. The same way physicists and scientists uncover natural law that exists, that we're just governed by. And when they discover these laws, Rich, you know what they do with them? They violate them. We discover gravity and we can't break it. And as soon as we discover it, we break it. Before Newton and them discovered what gravity was, man was trapped on the ground. But after they discovered what it was and how it works, we flew through the air in the airplane. So the laws that were given by God are meant to be broken by man so we can be free. And the truth set us free from gravity. And Edison set us free from the nighttime. And he gave us electricity and this radio station and so forth with Marconi and Tesla radio and these other great things. And individuals will make spiritual discoveries. And this will set us free from church. It'll set us free from clergy. It'll set us free from the spiritual chains that fettered us like physical ones did.
Okay, so what do we get out of it? I mean, are we going to
peace on
be
earth.
Blissful?
Well, we get peace on earth.
Are we going to be like, well, how did you say it before? The high jihad. Do we got to are we going to have to subjugate our animal natures for our own good? Is that the thing? Are we going to all of a sudden just be better? I don't know about all of a sudden, but over time and that stuff will just be weeded out, or are we going to be what's the point?
Our moral and ethical concept of what good behavior is that's given to us by our upbringing is quite incorrect to the actual lifestyle of what a spiritual person would have. Jesus went to the temple with a whip and upturned tables and called the people they're hypocrites, and he told his apostle to buy swords. He went to war. So in some instance, that's appropriate behavior. So in other instances, it's not appropriate behavior. So circumstances alter cases. So we can't say there's a rubber stamp and everybody's going to be the clone of this or that. But we can tell you this, that Missoula is not at war with, what's the nearest city down the Bitterroot? Ravalli. If we were, there'd be casualties and bodies piling up, and a lot of our money and funding would have to go for defenses. Well, there's peace. I can drive down there and feel relatively safe from the militia. I'm kidding. I can drive down in that area, and faith is prophesied of in the book of Isaiah. It's a house of the Lord that the nations will flow to and beat their swords into plowshares. There'll be peace on earth governmentally. And the problems we have today, war, famine, starvation, the hole in the ozone, the nuclear waste disposal, crime in the inner cities, and these type of environmental global problems that threaten us, these will be taken away. And we will be given, you know what, a new set of problems. And they'll be very hard to deal with, very difficult. And then we'll solve them. And then you know what we'll get? More problems. And the reason is that happiness is the successful solution to our problems. So God gives us plenty of problems, so we'll be happy. But we won't have to have the problems of genocide. Do we need to have that as an actual problem? This is a gross problem that should be fixed. See? Now, what
was the problem before this one, this set? Right, because it seems like it's the same problems, only with different tools.
The problem before which set?
So what we got now with nuclear war and world greed and the pollution and the fact that we're gumming up the world and turning it into a toilet, and don't seem to have any consciousness about it.
This is a repeating problem. That's why the other civilizations have been wiped out. That we've never had a time in the history of this planet since the birth of the solar system that humankind on the planet has developed the technology to unite all the people of the world through a global communication system with the power and the technology to basically do whatever they want. Like we could clone people, We could genetically engineer out diseases from us that are hereditary. We have the power over life and death concerning ourselves. We've never evolved to that state of knowing and been spiritual at the same time and exercise love and justice and mercy and concord and fidelity and harmony. That has been repeated at least according to the Aztec tablets 4 other times. We don't know the name of the first civilization. It's all legend. There's no trace of these, but people call Mu, Lemuria, Atlantis, and the one we're in now. We're going to enter a cycle of a golden age of mankind, this coming change, that according to the prophecy, the 6,000-year cycle of Adam, the 6-day work week, each day is 1,000 years, that from 4000 BC, the dawn of written history, at the year 2000 AD, will be in the image of God. And this has never happened before. Now, what we evolve into naturally, I don't know. And the type of choices that humanity makes, I can't even envision barely the world in 400 years, how different the average citizen, world citizen will be, how educated each individual will be. Even if I learned all of these things now as an adult, what about my child? If my child still has to go through the same evolvement. They still have to learn to talk, walk, read and write, and then do other activities. So even if we had it all, and as an individual we try to reach our potential, a lot of our work has to do in bringing forward the next generation in such a way that they're ahead of us. But today we have a hazing system. You'd be surprised, like Witten and Thurston and the physicists and scientists that are at the breakthrough of a unified field theory in physics, a unified field concept in the branches of mathematics. But when you go to school, you learn arithmetic, and you don't get exposed to, for instance, science, higher science and math concepts, so you're in college, see? But these things should, that we've worked so hard to be at the forefront of, we should be exposing to our youth at a very early age. One child's father was advanced in these fields, and he shared this with his son. And when his son was 8 years old, the teacher gave them a lesson where they had to add, as punishment, all the numbers from 1 to 100. But because his father had shared with him the highest concepts of civilization at that time, when he was 8, he came back in 2 minutes and said, here's the answer. And he created a little math formula where you plugged in whatever number was the highest one, and it instantly told you, just by adding and dividing by 2 things, what the answer was. His name was Gauss, and he's a great scientist. See? And this is because he was shown by the adults that he was with where society was at and where their barrier was when he was a kid. Today our kids go to school, we don't share with them any of the cutting edge problems. We haze them through eraserhead school system, assembly line school system, and now Clinton promises everybody a college education and more student loans for college. But by graduating from a liberal arts degree at college today is the same merit that you would have gotten from graduating from high school in this country of America maybe 60 years ago for free. So they've changed the capacity and the degree of the actual knowledge and shifted money in these different things. Whereas if we exposed our children to these concepts, instead of closing Roosevelt School and these other things, we would have a great and powerful society that would be generous and kind. The greatest weapon against international terrorism is international friendship. We don't need armed guards at the airport and people looking for terrorists coming to nuke us. We need to be nice to other people, not just as individuals, but as a nation and as a government. The way Jesus didn't come and say, bow down before me, but he came and bowed down before his apostles, and on his hands and knees, he anointed their feet and said, the greatest of you will be the least of you. And this is the symbol of government. Government is to be serving the people, not to become some separate entity like Eisenhower warned us against as an industrial military complex on its own. It's gone havoc, way out of control. Chief Justice Douglas from the Supreme Court came to Missoula in the late 60s and warned them about a government behind the scenes that was world bankers, that was orchestrating world wars, that decided to wage an economic war on the East and to set up a trifold economic state. Like in George Orwell's book, he's got 3 systems. And they called it 3 sides, the Trilateralist Commission of Bankers. And when Nixon was pulled out of office because he wouldn't go for it and other reasons, and of course, they're all just as crooked as each other.
Conspiracy theory there.
It's not conspiracy theory. I don't believe in them. I believe, Rich, in institutionalized corruption I'm a 100% fan of institutionalized corruption. It's got nothing to do with the conspiracy. So these people said, hey, when Carter was the Democratic candidate, he was a trilateralist with Zbigniew Brzezinski that David Rockefeller hired to set up this world banking system in a modern phase after Bretton Woods, after World War II, and there's some history there. And Bush was the Republican candidate. He was a trilateralist. And some of the early investigative news reporters and cutting-edge folks like yourself said, hey, wait a minute. If we vote Democrat or Republican, we get a trilateralist. What kind of club is that? They started investigating it. And like Silkwood, they got driven off the road. And so some of them backed off. So Bush dropped out of the Republican race, and he went independent ticket. Then Ronnie Reagan was raised up, and he went Republican. And after people calmed down because he wasn't in the trilateralist Bilderberger gang, they slipped Bush back in there as vice VP. And some people think he ran the White House for the 8 years, and he was president for 4 more on his own. And so then Bush had the gall to even come up and say New World Order. And now everybody knows about the Trilaterals Commission, the Center of Foreign Relations. All the news media members belong to it. They all are part of the same gang, but it's no longer a fringe thing. It's a standard fare. You know why? Like the Titanic. That they build the Titanic as the ship that God couldn't sink. And the elite lived on the upper deck, and the lower class lived below deck. And the guy that ran it says, we don't want to have too many lifeboats up here. It doesn't look so good. So when it says the ship God can't sink. So he sunk it. And so the metal was made inferior. And when it hit that iceberg, it shattered. It didn't just rip into it, but it was made inferior. They didn't know that. And so when the ship sank, the rich went to save themselves. And they got in their lifeboats, and they locked in the lower classes in the boat, in the lower decks, to drown. They actually shut the gate and barred them in. If they tried to jump ship, they shot them in the head. It's all in this documentaries they put out recently, in this movie too. So they got in the lifeboats, and the lifeboats have to get away from the ship, because when it goes under, it creates a suction. And then they sound the bell for the lifeboats to go back and get the people in the water. And only one lifeboat went back to get the people. The one woman stood up and said, let's go back to get him. And they says, you sit down or we'll throw you out. And only the rich people were in these boats. Out of 2,200 people, 700 rich people survived. Everybody else drowned. They were from the poor and lower castes. And what then happened there is that one of the boats, each boat could hold 70 men. One of the boats only had 15 people in it, and all the luggage and possession that these rich people saved before other people. So America is being putting itself forth tonight, this week at the State of the Union address, as the country that God can't sink. And he's going to sink this country with that attitude, like he sank the Titanic. And the thing about the Titanic is the frogmen went down there, and they couldn't raise that boat back up again. They tried. And you know this thing about the frog, Rich? If you take a frog and throw it in a hot pan of water, it'll jump out because it doesn't want to boil. Take a frog and put it in a pan of water, room temperature on the stove, it'll sit in that water because it likes the water. And then you start turning up the heat real slow. And it can't tell. And you turn it up some more. And you turn it up higher and higher. And that frog will stay in that pan till it boils to death in the water. The book of Revelations prophecy says there's 3 foul spirits like frogs gathering the people together for this battle of Armageddon, which would be a nuclear war. Did you know, Rich, that Bill Clinton changed our thermonuclear strategy 4 weeks ago?
Nope.
He changed it to first strike winnable thermonuclear war. That if America even sees a perceived threat of nuclear war, they're allowed to go in full blast and nuke that country and wipe them right off the face of the earth. This was exposed in the media by the Washington Post. A Clinton directive changes strategy on nuclear arms, which I have the article right here in front of me. And they did this so they could go in and take Iraq. Why? The United States won the first phase of the Gulf War. We're still at war with Iraq. We're only in a temporary ceasefire. But legally, we're still at war. So we don't have to go back to Congress to get an act of war. We're still at war. Saddam lost. He got nothing. His country's got nothing. Those people are starved. But he still has his oil. That's what this is about. And you know what his Congress did? They voted to authorize their president and their democracy, Saddam Hussein, to sell all the oil in the country, which has never been sold to a foreign power. And he sold it all on a 23-year oil contract to Russia and China. So now,
Really?
yeah,
They've sold all the oil in there?
to Russia and China. And this Iraqi oil sale to Russia and China on a 23-year oil contract was released January of 14th and 16th in 1997 from Baghdad by Leo Barco, the writer from Reuters. So China and Russia now own the largest oil reserve in the world. China, Art Bell, who's puts himself out there as one of the big wigs in radio. He went to China, just came back, and he said, imagine the American Industrial Revolution, and then multiply it by 1,000, by 10,000. That's China right now. There's 23 high-rise apartment buildings going up in Shanghai right now that are almost completed. The Chinese, in this market system that we have been able to devalue their currency. In a statement in the Missoulian Friday, January 16th, 1998, that caused the Hong Kong market to drop by 7%, making this one big deal this Westerner did go bad by changing the currency. And by doing this, they've threatened the United States with an economic war, that if there was no war with Iraq, if those sanctions were lifted and Russia and China had that oil, China has all the natural resources other than oil. They have the forests, they have the spices, they have the silk, they have the manpower, they have the consumers to live as a great world power in the East without the United States. So the United States, in a last-ditch oil grab, feels they have to go in to protect the Trilateralist Commission of the United States, Europe, and Japan to win the economic war they're losing. So they have to have a military war and to take out Iraq. So in this nuclear...
So that treaty or that giving of the oil to China and Russia would be void.
That's right. By military, might makes right. But legally, it's theirs. They bought it. So, and what Saddam...
Now, listeners, don't you realize this is just the most amazing thing?
It's also true, Rich.
Yeah.
What's even amazing is when Saddam...
That's why that's such a trip.
When Saddam states that his country will no longer tolerate the sanctions till May, what he's really saying is, in May, Iraq, China, and Russia and the Arab world is no longer going to play your UN game. We're going to sell our oil and ship it to China and Russia. Stop us. Eh? The United States doesn't obey the UN, and Israel is in violation of many UN regulations. See? So Iraq said, well, in May, it's over with anyway. So Madeleine Albright today in the news said, she's not bright at all, by the way. She said, I'm not going overseas to try to get support for people to help us go in to destroy Iraq. I'm going over there to tell them that we're going in to destroy Iraq and that they can either be with us or against us when we do this. And that's what happened this week, Rich, that we can't have a Bay of Pigs Cuban Missile Crisis. Castro in Cuba will go where the money is. And he ain't getting that money from Russia. So the Pope's giving Cuba the money on the condition that Castro sides with the United States and its allies in this coming world civil war. So the Pope was in Cuba this week. Then you just can't go in and nuke Iraq. Well, what do you do? The Mideast supposed peace process. Apparently fighting is another word for peace process. It's not peace, so it's fighting, so they call it the peace process. So it's a euphemism. So he calls Netanyahu over here. And Netanyahu, he tells him, we're going in there and we want your assurances that you'll go along with the game, or we'll just take you out like we took out Rabin. By the way, I was in written correspondence with Rabin. I have letters from his department in ink, signed by his department, thanking me for sending him the prophecies. He did start changing the peace policy over there based on the guidance from Baha'u'llah's writings, and he was taken out. You get a good man in office like Kennedy, you get a good guy up there like Bobby Kennedy, you get a good guy up there like Martin Luther King, they get taken out. So, what are you going to do about it? Was it the CIA, the FBI? I don't know. Ask Oliver Stone, But they get taken out, like Lincoln got taken out. They just take these people out. They have a habit of assassinating people. Assassinating Saddam Hussein won't be a trick. Half America or more wants it to happen anyway. So
why didn't they do it already?
That they don't want to go in there and do that. They don't want to have a war. They've been waging an economic war since World War II. If there's a nuclear war, then you destroy a lot of stuff. And then you don't have enough consumers to sell your stuff to. They didn't, when World War II ended with the dropping of the bomb, they said, we can't have another world war. We'll nuke each other. We have to come up with another way to take over the world. So they met at a place called Bretton Woods, and they devised an economic way by giving countries national debt by loaning them money. That the bankers says that it's also in the Bible that whoever you owe money to controls you. See, and so if I am loaned money by somebody, let's say I take out a loan for $100,000, and I only have to pay back $10 a month. Wow, I'll never see $100,000. I can do a lot with that. I can improve my house. I can get a computer or a car. I can do good for my family, my friends. I might even be able to start a small business and generate more than $10 a month, and not only pay down the 10, but a lot of the principal. I'll take the 100,000. Well, then if a few years down the line they say, okay, we're calling back the whole loan. You still have 80 grand left on it. I go, well, I don't have 80 grand. Well, I see you started a new business, and that business is worth 10 grand. We'll take that. I see you fixed your house up, and now you have equity in it. That's worth, let's say it was worth 30 grand. We'll take that. Nice car, we'll take that. So they foreclose on me. So this country didn't have a national debt. It went off the gold standard. Tricky Dick took us off the gold, and this country borrowed a lot of money. Kennedy didn't want to go for that. He was taken out. So now we have a huge national debt. You know who doesn't have a national debt? People under the Iron Curtain. Russia, no national debt. China, communist, no national debt. Iraq, they've got their own oil. They don't have to borrow money. No national debt. Who else? Iran, no national debt. Libya, no national debt. Who's into it? Europe, Japan, the United States, big national debt. So when Boris Yeltsin's predecessor, Gorby, played the Sunshine Act and signed the bill, they said, okay, Russia has more oil than any other place on earth, but they don't have the technology to mine it out and refine it. We will lend your country money under the condition you sign over your oil as collateral. So this is how the economic war works.
Did they do that?
Yeah, they did it, but they haven't taken the money yet. So China always gets most favored trade status from the United States. So they will abstain from all votes in the UN. So they don't veto anything. And China traded their veto power in the UN for most favored trade status. So no matter what atrocities they commit, the U.S. will never take away their most favored trade status. And Clinton's been interviewed several times, and he says a lot of things he does internationally is things that he wouldn't want to do, but they tell him he should do it, so he goes along with it. He says this. And the article was a psych article saying he compartmentalizes things. But he's carrying out the will of these foreign bankers. He got a Rhodes Scholarship. He studied overseas. He's the strong man for this. They set up the U.S. president, the U.S. Army as the strong enforcer for these world bankers. Well, the guy...
Aren't they mostly American bankers? Or who else bankers? Japan, Japanese bankers, European bankers?
Yeah, it's trilateral. Japan, Europe, old money Europe, and America, the Rockefellers and stuff. So Jiang Zemin, the president of China, was just here. And everywhere he went, he got hit in his last trip a few months ago. You're a violator of human rights. He got so angry, I'm paraphrasing right here. He says, me, you went in there and you're killing over 7,000 children in Iraq every month. Me, China, he says, you people burned down your own citizens in Waco just because they had a religion different than yours, but this country is freedom of religion. You killed the people at Ruby Ridge. You burned down the MOVE group in Philadelphia, 5 square city blocks, including innocent people. You've got the worst human rights record as America in history. He says, I've had it with this country. And he immediately went back to China. And the next day, right when he arrived there, Boris Yeltsin met Zemin in the People's Palace and signed a 100-year dispute into a peace treaty and shook China's hand. And then the Asian market collapsed. So China, in this article that we have here, okay,
and so all of these things that are happening are leading us into
a world war.
And is there any way out?
Yeah.
And that's
get it over and done with. So these are all press releases that document all this. This one is called Covenant with Death that explains the United States foreign policy as well as domestic. And here's an article from USA Washington. Analysts, China working on ways to win war with U.S. And when Zemin shook the hand with the Russians, he turned this paperwork over to them about how they win their war. Here's a quote from this article on September 9th, 1997, USA. But the hardest assessment came from Michael Pillsbury, an expert on China at the Pentagon's National Defense University. He said his translations of Chinese military publications show remarkably accurate descriptions of the weakness in U.S. weapons. A common theme, Pillsbury said, is a Chinese military view that America is a declining, quote, a declining power with but 2 or 3 decades of primacy left. He said they believe that, quote, China believes U.S. military forces, while dangerous at present, are vulnerable, even deeply flawed, and can be defeated with the right strategy. This strategy involves using new technology to, quote, defeat the superior with the inferior. Phase 1, economic war, dropping the Asian market. Americans make money, and these bankers make money when currency goes up and down. It's like me. If I got $1 and Canadian dollars worth $1.01, see? So I invest in American, see? And then what happens is American money goes up to $1.01 and Canadian money goes down to 98 cents. So then I buy Canadian at 98 cents from $1.01 and I wait. Then Canadian goes back up to $1 and the United States drops to 99 and I sell back. And now I've made a penny profit for every dollar. When you do that with trillions and gazillions of dollars, you're making millions and billions of profit, millions and trillions. And this is what they do. My brother-in-law works on Wall Street. He does this for a living. And it's a market. That's what it is, a money market based on money currency fluctuating up and down. And just one penny can break or make a country economically. So China dropped their value of the currency, bottomed out the Hong Kong market, hit one phase of the Trilaterals Commission in the Asian front of Japan, and now the Americans are like mice running into the trap. Oh, let's buy the Asian currency while it's low, then it will go back up, and then we'll sell back and win. And that's the sucker trap for this economic war. They got to get out of this. They can't stop a private American citizen from investing in this type of a scenario because it's America, land of the free. The government knows it's going to destroy this country. When Hyundais and Toyotas come in here 5% cheaper, that's good for people who will buy that because they don't have a lot of money. They won't buy American. When they come in 50% cheaper, they're going to buy that too, and they'll shut down the factories and so forth. This is the Chinese strategy with Russia, and China's now building in Syria, condominiums with the Arabs, the East versus the West. And this is what they're going to do. If we just had peace right now, Rich, we'd have to let Russia and China become the future world power along with the Muslims. Russia is not a Christian nation. Russia itself is a Christian state, but Russia is not a country. It's a superpower. It's called a Commonwealth of Independent States. The Russian army of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Commonwealth of Independent States Army, is 1/4 Muslim. Almost a fifth or more of all the states that belong to the Commonwealth of Independent States over there are Muslim. Kazakhstan is a Muslim country with its own nuclear arsenal. If Russia doesn't go along with Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan will start a nuclear war on its own with the United States. Russia will be out on the lurch. So Russia's only chance to be a world power still is to side with the Muslims, which is in their backyard. Iraq is Muslims' Mexico. Having the United States presence in Iraq for Russia is like the U.S. having Russia and Cuba for us. This is an imbalance of power. And imbalances of power throughout history create a situation where power needs to be rebalanced. All the world wars and all the wars between the so-called superpowers have started when there's no buffer states. That's why Poland and these other countries were created after and before World War I to act as buffer states between France and Germany or between Germany and Russia. So the powers wouldn't go to war. But they're just joining NATO now. There's no buffer zone between Russia and Poland anymore. It's part of NATO. So you've got a front line there with no buffer country. And this has always been a sign of world war. Any historian on campus here would tell you that. It's known. So every sign, you don't need to be a prophet. You don't need to read the Bible. You don't need to see the scripture to see war. You don't need to be a prophet to predict war. I'll give you a prediction. Total peace on earth and the goodwill of all men by the year 2000. Now, a prediction like that in the midst of an international crisis, now that's something. How could all of this possibly be reversed within less than 2 years? How could that happen?
Who would tell me?
Well, when the Titanic sank, it was a blessing because it created new maritime law. After that, people were so outraged, they says, we got to have a lifeboat for every man, woman, and child on that boat. I don't care what aesthetics are. And we can't let them board the lifeboats according to first class or second class. We have to do it the right way. All women and children first. All men last, not just by classes. So the sinking of the Titanic was a godsend for the safety and security and salvation of the people. Now, Abdul-Baha is the son of Baha'u'llah. and he was about to come to America to speak before Congress in 1912. Leaving London, the Baha'is came up to him. Now I'm going to tell you something about the Baha'is. They said, Abdul-Baha, we have your tickets. And Abdul-Baha says, those are not my tickets. And, oh, yes, we bought and paid for your name on it. Because those are not my tickets. And they said, well, we're getting on the boat. We'll see you in America. And they all got on the Titanic. So they went away from Abdul-Baha. And Abdul-Baha got on the USS Cedric. And when he landed in New York on April 5th of 1912, they asked him, why didn't you get on the Titanic? He says, when I read in the paper that was the ship that they said God couldn't sink, you couldn't have you dragged me on that boat. And God sunk it. We don't challenge the creator of the universe in this type of a way. See? And then he spoke.
Why would the creator of the universe be so petty?
It's not petty. The people are petty. Why would somebody be so petty as to put over the gangplank the ship that God can't sink? They're trying to say that they're great and powerful.
So that's another example of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, there's two forces in civilization. The one comes from the manifestation, which is creative, which is good. The other one comes from the people that claim to be their followers, such as the Baha'is, which claim to be the followers of Baha'u'llah, or the Christians that claim to be the followers of Jesus, or the Muslims that are the followers of Muhammad. These people go in and they hijack the religions in the name of God and in the name of the founder, and they create a war machine that is based on the inferiority-superiority complex, where civilization becomes a mad rush to build the Tower of Babel or the ship that God can't sink, instead of focused on the better things of life, the good of this world and the next. And a lot of people in America have had it with the so-called rat race, but they're helpless to stop their government from going headlong into this war. Well, if people knew all the things that I just read in these releases, they would be so outraged by listening to somebody like Madeleine Albright say, we're going overseas to tell people that we're going to go nuke Iraq and everybody else can just choose sides. Americans would just freak out, but they got a distraction right now. It's like the movie Wag the Dog, which I haven't seen, but I know the premise behind it. The president's embroiled in a real sex scandal in that movie. So they create a fictitious war that they bunk up to take the heat off the sex scandal.
That's in the Wag the Dog?
That's what the movie's about. So the media is saying, look, Hollywood beat it to the real life situation. But the real life situation's not the tail wagging the dog. It's the real dog that's in power wagging the tail. And the dog wagging the tail is that we have a real life war situation. Thermonuclear war. This strategy not only gives us first strike thermonuclear war against Iraq, but it changes our nuclear strategy to supposedly protect America from retaliation from Russia and China.
We can't possibly do this.
Bell declined, however, to address the reported shift that would allow the military, this is from the article, to plan attacks against wider spectrums of targets in China, including the country's growing military-industrial complex, its conventional forces. Another official said there was, quote, no debate with respect to targeting China, even though Clinton last month said he told Chinese President Jiang Zemin that he would, quote, establish cooperation, not conflict, as a model for U.S.-China relations in the 21st century. According to the written statement to Congress in June by CIA Director George J. Tenet, China, quote, is presently modernizing both the size and quality of its strategic missile force. The qualitative modernization effort may be benefiting from Russian technology and expert. Currently, a small number of China's strategic missiles have sufficient range to target large urban areas in the United States. The aim of the plan was to ensure that China could not become the world's most powerful nation following a general nuclear war between Russia and the United States. That is our new nuclear policy. They feel they can go in and strike Iraq at the perceived threat of chemical or biological weapons being used. Well, I have a friend here in town and other people, they get sick with the flu. I get the flu sometimes. You know what they're telling me now? They go, I'm not feeling good today. Why not? They go, I have flu-like symptoms. They didn't tell me they had the flu. No, they've got flu-like symptoms. This is a media bite about what happens when you're poisoned by chemical or biological weapons. You have flu-like symptoms. Well, now the people in America have a perception of a threat of chemical or biological attack. And this law says if our government feels a perceived threat of a chemical attack, we can go in and nuke another country. Just a perceived threat. Not even a real threat, but a perceived threat. See? The problem with this is that when you're mean and nasty to all the other nations and the big bully on the block with the nuclear weapon, like Teddy Roosevelt said, walk quietly and carry a big stick. Well, when they dropped the bomb in Los Alamos, United States got its big stick. And they took Panama from those people, and they're taking the oil in an oil grab. And the American people will be distracted by this real war situation that's happening, East versus West. So they've bunked up a sex scandal to create a media stir to distract the people from this thermonuclear war. And they did it the week the Pope was in Cuba, the week that Netanyahu spoke to Clinton, and he left the White House and he did an interview with Pat Robertson, who's a fanatical nut, and Jerry Falwell. I've got a friend here in town that's a Christian minister, and if there's ever such thing as a true Christian today, it's him. And he's retired. When he was here in Montana in the 60s, he marched on Washington with Martin Luther King. And by the way, I'm just going to mention the fact he didn't really make a deal of this, but he's himself is white. But he marched on this, and he got flack from his other friends here in Montana. While he was in Washington marching with Martin Luther King, the people in Missoula, what were they doing? They were burning books at the UM campus in the quad. That's what they were doing, and he told us this. And he said, today it's the same people that call themselves the moral majority. And he says they're neither. They're not moral, and they're really not a majority. And you know what? 1% of the population of the world is not a majority, but they own 99% of the wealth, and they're immoral. Then he said they call themselves the Christian right. And then he said they're neither. They're not Christian and they're not right. And he helped Eldridge Cleaver come here. That's how I happen to hear him. He's a very good person, and he knows what's going on here, and he believes in the spiritual teachings there. And these people have hijacked America. They've hijacked Christianity. They're not supporting the Constitution. We have a problem here in Missoula, like we did in the 60s with book burning, with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and these other freedoms. We have a public access community cable station here in town, and we run a program every Friday night, which I guess I'll plug, on MCAT for 4 hours, 2 hours of talk, 2 hours of call-in, guest speaker from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock every week. It's available Mountain Standard Time on our website, BPUPC.org, some W's before it. Anyway, our show, which I went down to the Missoula City Council and fought for MCAT to keep their funding when we heard the city was going to do something there. After we spoke there, said our piece.
A few years ago.
Quite a bit. Gene Bernofsky works for the post office here in town, wonderful person, came up and said, you guys need to have a live show on MCAT. And we said, okay, Gene. He said he ran Labor Vision. We'll take you up on that. He's a great defender of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, these things. So is the other MCAT production staff, Andy Thorgerson, Randy Ammon that runs the program, Lori Hudak, the Beer Talk guys, Mary Canty, all of them. And they take a lot of flack for defending the Constitution because of the different type of views that are presented there. Now, our program airs Friday night when MCAT's closed. A lot of people don't know that. Nobody working at MCAT is going to be there Friday night. They all go home and they lock the doors. Dave here, I guess, been doing a lot of talking. He's got a degree in this stuff.
Right, radio, TV, and film production.
And he helped train, and my wife helped lay out and train people and wrote the book at MCAT for how to produce live shows. They've done a lot of good work down there helping out, and they are practically unpaid staff Friday nights. They cablecast. They have a key to the door. We lock up. We protect the place from vandals. We do whatever we're told. The rules change a lot, but we do what we're told. And we try to keep it nice. And Friday night, the thing would be closed anyway. If we weren't there, nothing would be on Friday night.
Okay. Well, no, that's something else would happen.
No, really, it's closed. Nothing would be there Friday night, really. So what's happening now is that there's another religious programmer there that comes on before us. His name's, what's his name? Jay Wagner. They're trying to shut down all the religious program over there, according to a rumor that I heard. And that he's got like 5 shows. There have been a lot of complaints that there's too much religious programming. They want to reschedule. It wouldn't affect us because we're not on the actual schedule of times that they're open. And I don't agree with what this person has to say. I want him to be there with his show because through the contrast of differing opinions, the spark of truth comes out. And I like to point out everything he says that's wrong. I watch his show religiously every week. I'm a great fan.
You're amazing.
I talk about it afterwards. And this has to stop. We have a very serious freedom of speech issue here. McCarthy Coyle is a great defender of this and for public broadcasting. It's just incredible the amount of effort and flack that some of these people have to take.
There's public access versus national public radio issues.
I don't know
Versus
about
public.
those. I'm not informed about that. But I know that your station is one of the most progressive here, and that Montana has always fought for these things.
Well, progressive for here, yeah.
Yeah. I heard it was a
well-
long fight to get PBS TV established in this town. I'm glad they won out and were able to do it. I don't really know about behind the
Did you hear
scenes
that
there.
they're trying to take over MCAT's station
No.
number?
Station number?
Yeah.
What's that?
KUFM TV is I've heard is trying to get channel seven?
Seven.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a better picture than the channel 11 that they're on already.
They're on channel 11?
Yeah, and
Oh,
they
you
were
mean the-
offered channel 6, which is next to KSPS channel 5, but they didn't want that because they didn't like the competition. But they wanted 7, and it was like they didn't think that what was going on MCAT was as valuable as what they're doing.
Well, I don't know about that. You know why 6 is afraid of 7, Rich?
What?
Because 7, 8, 9.
Yeah,
It's all numbers. It doesn't matter to me if we're on channel 82. The fact is that the public access is on the cable, and it doesn't matter to me if I punch in 07 or 32 or 1008 or whatever it
Well,
is.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, I don't really know about that. I only know about things I'm directly
that
exposed
isn't a challenge
to.
thing. That isn't any kind of a challenge.
But what I'm talking about
Let's
is the actual
recap here a
scheduling.
little bit, shall we?
Okay,
The world's going to shit in a handbasket.
I wouldn't say that.
It seems to be run by a group of people for world domination,
I'd say that.
and then China and Russia and other countries are trying to get their shit together, so that at least they can hold their own. At most, they can have their world domination. They're using America and the model of how we became so successful. Like you said, that China has its own trees and its own oil, and they can do what we did. And then all of a sudden they can be the wealthy ones and send us,
That's why I brought this up. Same thing. My view is peace on earth. If they're going to succeed, let China and Russia succeed. If somebody else wants number 7, let them have it. We'll take another number. That there's no reason to fight over these things, draw lots, whatever they need to
The
do.
assumption is that they're going to want to come over here and tie us all up and kill us and torture us and be mean to us.
We don't need them to do that. We've got the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to burn us down and kill us all, don't we? Like they did in Waco
Why
and
do
Ruby
you
Ridge.
support Waco? They were really mean to their children. And
No.
they had 14-year-old duplicate wives and all that crap going on down there.
Okay, according to the Texas Authority, as published in Newsweek magazine, under a 2-year investigation, there was no signs of child abuse down in that area. A lot of this is political spin. I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not a Branch Davidian, and I don't believe David Koresh is the Messiah, because changing your name from Vernon Howell to David doesn't make you a descendant of King David. Okay? So he was up here in Montana in the 70s, in the early 80s, and he went through some of the Baha'i firesides, and he became acquainted
Oh, yeah?
with some of the proofs that we present this with. And he was able to sway these people with that. And we have a lot of wannabes that come through the Baha'i faith that want something for themselves and are willing to get enough of an education out of it to benefit whatever their personal objectives are. And this is just the
happens.
way things are. So the problem is, in America, we have freedom of religion. It's not really a problem for me that you can worship an Easter bunny if you want, or a bunny rabbit, and that's okay, see? So if that was their religion, that's their business. But they said they had a methamphetamine lab there. And that's how they got the authorization to use tanks. They weren't manufacturing drugs. They couldn't bust these people on their difference of religion. So they bunked up other causes to go in and kill them. And then they burned them down to destroy the evidence. The only time the children were molested in Waco, Texas, was when the poison gas suffocated them and their bodies contorted from the cyanide that was produced. Now, there's an award-winning video that's up for an Oscar right now that was sent to us. The producer of it is probably going to be a guest on our MCAT show in the following weeks. It's called, it's about Waco. It's Under Siege. I forget the exact title of it.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too.
But anyway, we've shown other clips like this, and it gets into the documentation of it. It's got 2 thumbs up by Siskel and Ebert, and it gets into the child molestation issue, and it says it wasn't there. So a lot of this stuff, which is sexual, is brought up in our society by a culture of Howard Stern's, where America is a nation of voyeurism. And this is how they're able to use Clinton's sex life to divert the attention of the American people from these serious issues. Now, this press release, over 200 were sent to the United Nations. And this is the cover of the press release. And as you can see here, and people can see on our show or on our website, we have a map of Iraq with the River Euphrates in red. And in the book of Revelation, in chapter 9, verse 14, it says that the 4 winds of destruction are held back at the great River Euphrates, which flows through Iraq. We sent this all over the world. We tried to prevent the trade tower bombing in this. Now, there's different types of prophecy. That the way prophecy works, Rich, is that God foresees a time when society will become dark and despairing, okay? Like a valley of the shadow of death or whatever. And therefore this time when this happens is prophesied of, a dark day. And so God, because he loves the people, wants to fix this situation, so he sends a person that will appear in that scenario to get a raw deal as an individual, but there'll be a light to get humanity through that dark time. And the dark time is prophesied of, and the personage to appear then is prophesied of by their name is prophesied, their date is prophesied, their address and their mission. This prophecy of the coming of the solution is written in stone, and it can't be changed. It will be fulfilled. And then the prophecy states that the people will eventually accept the teachings of this person, and things will be right. And the solution will be implemented, and health will be restored, and humanity will not be destroyed, and the world will not end. We don't believe in the end of the world. That's the prophecy. Then there's a prophecy that says that if the people don't accept the help that God sends, the natural courses will take effect and destroy those people. Not God, but because they go down this wrong road, they destroy themselves. And then the survivors will then recognize the one that God sent and accept the teachings, and humanity will continue. So the fact of the coming of this golden age is written in stone. It can't be changed. The names, dates, address, and missions of the promised ones that are prophesied of can't be changed. But whether we have a catastrophe or not can definitely be changed. Anytime there's this type of a prophecy, the purpose of it is to prevent the catastrophe. The only reason that God gives a prophecy of a coming catastrophe is to prevent the coming of the catastrophe.
So it's very different than those Christians that want it to happen so we get all raised up.
Now, if the world was going to end, I'd just go home tonight and party because tomorrow we die. But the world's not going to end. We're going to have a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work now. We need to come into the maturity of the human race. And
can we do this without being Baha'is? I mean, what's
this?
Also, now Baha'u'llah. Now who?
We can only do this, Rich, without being prejudiced.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing everybody can do.
That's right. So why would I want to be prejudiced against Baha'u'llah if he's the one that really fulfills prophecy for the second coming of Christ? I will accept that.
Yeah, well, people are afraid that it means that they've got to go to Baha'u'llah church.
Baha'is' faith is unorganized. There's no organized religion in the Baha'i faith. Abdul-Baha says you can't organize the spiritual. When they murdered the guardian of the Baha'i faith, the Hands of the Cause did this in 1957. They hijacked the Baha'i world faith, and they said that the administration was now the faith, and that whoever had a certain position in a pyramidal structure of this administration had a spiritual station. Whoever was higher up on the ladder, like any pyramid scheme, was above in this world and the next the people. And then they wouldn't let women sit on the council, the Universal House of Justice. They won't let them on there, despite the explicit text of the Octus that Baha'u'llah wrote that says women will sit on there. And they went against these things. When they break the covenant that God gave, they then violate human rights and civil rights. Now, if you're under this covenant-breaking so-called Baha'i outfit, and they accuse you of not living the Baha'i life, or not doing this, or prayer police, and you're just accused by one person, or rumor starts, they just blackball you right out of the group. And you'd never have a day in court. You're not innocent until proven guilty. You have no rights and no freedoms. The Baha'i faith, under the provisions of the covenant, is an unorganized religion. It's not incorporated. It's not organized. We have councils that are incorporated. That's a government for Baha'is. All Baha'is are allowed freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom of religion, their own way, and these other things. If other Baha'is don't like what they're doing or charge them with something maliciously, it's the council's job to protect, first job to protect the rights of the individual citizen. It's a spiritual democracy. I have caused quite a controversy in the past by things that I say, and I admit sometimes they might be inappropriate. Sometimes I really believe in them, and I don't think they're inappropriate. And I've had the council come to my defense, the local city council, the Baha'i Faith, several times to defend my right to put on our program, because it's not a organized teaching effort that's part of this administration. This is in the Baha'i Faith. This is Neil Chase exercising as individual. You can't take away their rights. That is what the Baha'i spiritual democracy does.
So the council is a local council.
That's right. And if they didn't like the decision, they appeal it. And it can go all the way up to the International Baha'i Council. And in that case, I can't sit in on that meeting as judge or jury, although we are council members with a vote of one, because it involves us. We are mandated to step off the council.
Is there an International Council of the Unorganized Baha'is?
There is what they call the Universal House of Justice that they put on Mount Carmel. The first International Baha'i Council was established by Shoghi Effendi on January 9th of 1951 on Mount Carmel. And Abdul Baha's son was the president of it, seated on the throne of David. When they murdered Shoghi Effendi in 1957, they hijacked the Baha'i faith, and this International Baha'i Council and Abdul Baha's son came to America, where 40 years later, on January 9th of 1991, the establisher of the Baha'i faith, the Knight of Baha'u'llah, Dr. Leland Jensen, set up the Second International Baha'i Council with Abdul Baha's grandson as the president, here in the Rocky Mountains, which is a prophesied safe place on 1830 South Avenue. What they did is they put a male club only clique of 9 people with a rotating chair without the throne of David as president that rules in a totalitarian, authoritative, prejudicial way over all the poor suckers that find their way and give their money over to this horrible group.
They, meaning those other Baha'is, not the Leland Jensen Baha'is.
No, the mainstream group.
Yeah.
Now, because of this, one of the greatest authorities on the mainstream group is an academic from the University of Michigan named Juan Cole. And he says exodus by troops. He reveals in his research that after the violation, when the 70s were happening, a lot of people didn't know about the hostile takeover of this Baha'i Gate. And they saw the Baha'i principles of the oneness of humanity, independent investigation of truth, elimination of prejudice of all kinds, true science and true religion should correspond, equality between men and women, and a spiritual solution to the economic problem, and several other things. They started coming to the Baha'i faith in droves from the Native American population that had suffered injustice in America, and from the black population in the South. And they started to overtake the white population and the Persian population in the Baha'i administration under the violation of the covenant. And when they saw this, they stopped printing the Baha'i Holy Writ, and they stopped teaching in the Native American areas and in the black South, because they didn't want minority Americans to become the majority of people within the Baha'i faith and in their administration, in their version of it. This is all documented. And now people have found out about this, and they're leaving this mainstream group by droves. Now, the average person that you meet that says they're Baha'i, maybe they're with this mainstream Sans Guardian deal, they've never heard that Baha'u'llah is descended from King David. They don't know that God made a covenant with David, that his throne would last forever and his lineage forever. And they don't understand that this kingship is not a dictatorship, that they only have a vote of one as the chairman of the board, and that the council's the head of the faith, that the men and women that will be elected to it, the majority or unanimous rules. If that president votes in the minority, then he's outvoted, and he has to carry out as the executive the will of the majority. And the council has a sphere of jurisdiction. Baha'u'llah says they will settle matters of state, but matters of worship are referable to the book. Now, if I'm a Jew or Muslim or Christian or something else, an atheist or New Age or whatever a personal belief I have, if I declare that I'm a Christian, and my church says, therefore, Muhammad's in Dante's third circle of hell, what right do I have to sit on an international body and make law for Muslims I don't have a right. I'm prejudiced against Muhammad. If I'm a Jew and I say I will never accept Jesus, what right do I have to sit on an international body and make governmental law for Christians and Muslims? But I have every right in my town to make local law or to make national law in my country. But what right do I have to sit on an international country if I'm prejudiced against another religion of any nation or an ethnic group of any nation or any tribe? I have no right to do that. So you don't have to be a Baha'i, but when this world government is set up, you have to be without prejudice. You can't be against Baha'u'llah and against Muhammad and Jesus. You can't be against any of them. You have to accept them all. And you can't be prejudiced against the descendant of King David that will be the president of that council, because then you'd be prejudiced against that.
How would self-sustaining agrarian little group of people, and they don't want, like what goes on now, I mean, the tribes, and then the U.S. just comes in and says, no, you can't do that. You have to play our game or no game. How would this council respond to something like that?
If in the future, when this house of the Lord is established and the majority of people belong to it, you're talking about minority group that might want to live in a village or something, they have every right to self-government in their way. And that if that's what they're going to do, their rights have to be protected. That if there was an island of people or a village of people that wanted to do these things their way, and there was some serious problem, for instance, they refused to give women rights in their tribe, let's say. They absolutely refused. They were going to kill their baby girls at birth. That if it is their sovereign state, would we have to respect the rights of them to murder innocent people? We would try to educate them not to, but do we have the right to go in there and destroy them if that's what they're up to? These are very serious and difficult problems, and undoubtedly they are going to rise, and they have very serious ethical and moral things, but they're also hypotheticals. And so in a hypothetical, we can imagine almost anything. That what will happen is people have the right to self-government.
What will control?
That when the majority of people in a country become Baha'i, the majority would vote to have a Baha'i national government that will be side by side with the secular government. And the Baha'i National Council will elect a representative to go to the international one, subject to the ratification or veto of the upper and lower houses of that government.
But this is a world religion, and so far the tenets are no prejudice, which doesn't have to have anything to do with a world religion or saying most of the country is Baha'i.
No, if the majority of people in the
country be a Baha'i,
if the majority of people
circumcised, what?
No, you don't. You have to accept something. You do have to accept something.
That the throne of David is living today.
No, you have to accept something bigger and more important than that.
That there is a God.
Not just that. There's something more important and bigger than that.
And that we're all equal under God.
What the person has to accept, Rich, is what any human being has to accept. They have to accept reality. That if we don't accept reality, Rich, that we're separated from reality, and that we need to be educated to understand what reality is. Our greatest scientists are wondering what the reality is when they investigate science.
Reality keeps changing because
reality does like reality change, Rich, or does our perception and our paradigm of reality change?
Well, what is reality?
Okay, reality is science and revelation. And as people are educated and come into this understanding, they would choose to accept reality. That nobody's going to foist the Baha'i faith on anybody.
But what reality do they have to accept? That there is prophecy? And what's the point?
If there is prophecy, and that's part of reality, they have to accept that. If God did create the universe and everything in it, and does have a plan for the people here that's positive and beneficial, and that's part of reality, they will accept that.
Yeah, but what is God's plan then? Peace and harmony?
Well, it says
or go out in spaceships and colonize other worlds and
there's Baha'i writings about that.
Baha'is or what?
There's Baha'i writings about these things. That the Baha'is are the most uneducated people on the planet. There's over 12 million around the world, and they're all in violation of the Baha'i covenant. They're like the ones that got on the Titanic and separated from Abdul-Baha. The Baha'is themselves murdered their guardian, Shoghi Effendi, in 1957.
Well, I'm not talking about those Baha'is.
The Baha'is that are under the provisions of the covenant, anybody can pay lip service and say that they're this, that, or the other thing. And so we're not going to question each other's motives. but they can't cross the line and violate other people's rights. And nobody has the right to sit on an international government if they're prejudiced against other people, races, or religion. And if they decide,
and they shouldn't, like NATO or like United Nations,
therefore,
or they shouldn't even be prejudiced to lead at all.
Because Baha'u'llah fulfills prophecy as the second coming of Christ, how could somebody sit on a world government and be prejudiced against Baha'is and not accept that he's from God?
Well, okay, let's not be prejudiced against Baha'is either.
Okay, well, that's right. And we don't need to be prejudiced against Dr. Jensen or somebody that happens to be descended from David.
Well, now, I'm not.
I know you're not, but let's take world history. We're coming up to the millennium, and we have millennial fever.
But the point is, what are they, I mean, is my accepting Dr. Jensen or whatever, does that, I mean, am I going to get a tattoo about it? What do I have to do? What's the big deal? Except for, I think there's just these basic things of enlightenment.
I don't think...
No prejudice, sharing and caring, don't kill your kids. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, like birth control and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, people can use birth control or not, whatever they want. Okay? So...
what about a world economy? What's the economy
There is a world economy, whether we like it or not, and the Universal House of Justice, with the men and women elected on it, will help regulate it so we don't have depressions and economic disasters.
And famines that are almost, I mean, I'd say this, all the famines have been created by greed and political stuff, not by lack of food.
Baha'u'llah gives an adumberation of Joseph's storehouse. We'll have local storehouse, a national storehouse, international.
Like a deseret?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, the Mormons have these places where they stockpile the food for themselves.
See, these religions are organized. It's very hard to get this concept across. The Baha'i faith is not an organized religion. That everything that people see me doing is just me doing what I'm doing. And it's not because I'm told to do it or I have to do it. Quite the opposite. People have tried to stop me for doing these type of things. And Dr. Jensen said you cannot do that, because according to the Baha'i faith and its constitution, these people have the freedom to do this. And you have to let them do that. For Dr. Jensen's role in this, it would be as if everybody in America all of a sudden decided that they were going to join China and Russia and give up and become communist and give up the Constitution. If one guy was left, Rich, if that was you, and you were the last American citizen, and you still believed in the Constitution, and you still believed in the branches of government, our system, and you had the books to explain how the system works and would be set up, it wouldn't make you the president, it wouldn't put you on the Supreme Court, but it would make you the last American citizen. And if by some chance you started to teach other people about the American Constitution, which is a nation of law, not a nation of people, and they became believers in the American way, in the American Constitution, and there were 4 or 5 of you, you're not going to really elect a president or have a Supreme Court or a Congress, but you might have some form of democracy working there in a casual way. You might use Robert's Rules of Order loosely, a silence, or some science of parliamentary procedure. But if you were so successful, Rich, in educating people about what this spiritual democracy was supposed to be behind American Constitution, that 240 million people graduated from your class on American government, they could then go ahead and elect their Congress and their president and appoint their Supreme Court positions for life. But that would not make you, Rich, president or king or guru or anything. It would make you the last citizen that was the first educator. And Dr. Leland Jensen was the last citizen of the Baha'i World Commonwealth and the first educator in this and the establisher. He had no guru role or nothing, or anything like this. And he set up a council, not his son, not his family, not a dictatorship, but a spiritual democracy that's guaranteed in the Baha'i Constitution because it comes from God. The people that set up this country, the 2 worst things you can say to somebody, Rich, and I think this cuts to the heart of your problem, is kingdom, is kingship. We fought a bloody war in America to get away from kings. When I told my grandma that's from Russia about the king of David and this type of word king, she was like, I can't believe it. We fought a Russian revolution. We escaped the Cossacks and the pogroms to get away from kingship and dictator. And you want to go back to that? It's the worst thing that ever happened. She couldn't believe it. So the French Revolution, we spent the last 600 years of history in bloody war fighting for our freedoms to get away from kingship. The other things humanity I'm talking about has fought for is to get away from popery, to get away from theocracy, a theocratic state, a church state. The Middle Ages is the worst time in history. They were against scientists. They were against indoor heating, indoor plumbing, electricity. These inventors were branded as witches and consorting with the devil. We'd still be living in rondavels and mud huts and dying at the age of 20, old men, or 30, old men with diseases and stuff. And they fought to get away from that. And so the two worst concepts you can present to a thinking person in the world today, especially a thinking American, is the concept of church state. Because humanity, people that know history know we fought to get away from that, and kingship. And so therefore the most offensive thing you could say to a thinking person would be some sort of phrase that combines both the concept of church, state, and God and kingship into one sentence. And that most offensive sentence could only be the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. It's completely offensive. And the people that say it's not offensive, that claim to be holier and saved, or born again or whatever, are the greatest offenders in the sight of God. And no thinking person wants to go back to that type of state. The predictions and prophecies that are made in the press releases that I have written with my personal name on it is my personal business. And the Baha'i councils have no right to stop me in promoting what I believe to be what this scripture is saying. For instance, the verse on the river Euphrates flowing through Iraq. Now, this happens to be something that Dr. Jensen pointed out, and that he is free, not as a guru and a leader to say this is how it is, but he's free as an individual to say this is how he sees it, and to present his proofs and evidences for his authority. See? Now, if I was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, I'd be doubting Thomas. I'm filled with doubts. America has gotten this release, the government, and they will go in and nuke Iraq and destroy Saddam. And they've changed their nuclear strategy to do this. But they have doubts. They doubt that Saddam will retaliate, or his people, after Saddam's killed, will retaliate and nuke New York. They doubt that. And they've created up a situation to doubt that. And I'd be like doubting Thomas. See? I don't have a date for that. I can't find one. I used up all the dates on the Trade Tower bombing and the nuclear Edison gas explosion and all these other things. They're all gone. And here we have it on the Siege of the City chart. Now, at each one of these dates, we could have stopped the catastrophe. That's why I was doing this. The vice president of the International Baha'i Council has written a letter to President Bill Clinton that's not religious in nature, but tells him how to straighten out all world affairs and warns him that if he doesn't follow the suit with this, the same thing will happen. Now, he came up with the November 4th date. This is not something I put in my press releases. I did announce it on the program, because he sold me at one of our forums on this through proofs and evidences, to the point that I figured I should say it on the TV. So I did 2 weeks before this build-up in the Gulf final showdown happened. So this prediction, based on this prophecy, is seen on videotape and audio to be given 2 weeks before this whole situation started. Now, how did I know that? And we have this all documented.
This past year?
Yeah, 97.
What escalation happened then?
This is when this whole buildup started, on November 4th, when they murdered Chogi Effendi, and then it's the 2-year anniversary when the Jews killed Itzhak Rabin, some Jews, not all Jews. The Christian nuclear superpower is on there, the beast. And it says the dragon gives its authority over to the beast. And the dragon's the East, China and the Muslims, and they abstain for most favored trade status. So this is an incredible vision from the prophet John in 96 AD of what's governing the world. Then they have war on a little lamb that speaks like the dragon. Well, the dragon of Islam is divided into 2 sects, Sunni and Shiite. The only Muslim country that's half Sunni and half Shiite is Iraq, because it borders Iran and the Sunni world. But it speaks like the dragon, but it's meek like a lamb. It's not powerful. In Revelation 13 talks about a war between the UN, these 4 Christian superpowers in the Security Council, and this little Muslim country, Iraq, in the East. And the dates are given here. And you asked me earlier, how do I happen to know all these things, all these press releases and stuff like this? Well, I'm going to tell you how I happen to know this thing. That, did God tell me? That, did I have a vision or have a dream? We have a weekly think tank here in Missoula that's an open public forum that meets Saturday nights. And people come there and they have to prove their points. If they say they had a dream or something, that's not good enough. They have to prove it. Anybody can attend these things, but we insist that they graduate through the 12 firesides that we give that are classes that are free, So we don't have to spend our Saturday nights.
Before they open their mouth.
No, so we don't have to spend our forums filling them in on the background. We get people in there and they're like, what about this? Well, that was covered in the fireside. And then they say, well, what about this? Well, that's in the fireside.
They should go to the firesides first.
They don't have to, and so sometimes.
If they do, they should be quiet.
No.
If they don't, I mean.
No, one of the complaints with our forums is that we let so many people come in before they complete the firesides that sometimes when we have important world issues to discuss, that's more higher level, like graduate school stuff, meetings, like at seminars, we have to go back and hit some of the basics, but we take the time to do that.
Why?
Why? Because we're non-prejudicial. And then the person usually says, I'll go through the firesides, and they get it there too. So we respect everybody. Also, sometimes we have a new person come in, and there's a holy writing that says knowledge is a light that God casts into the heart of whom he willeth. And we've had a lot of new people come in and say some really bedazzling things that have been the icebreakers for some of our very difficult problems. And we don't want to. Maybe it's selfish. We want to go forward, and we never knew when some new blood will get in there that maybe has a whole different perspective. We don't want to indoctrinate people like the school system does. That's coming from a true genius point of view.
And you use all the different traditions.
We'll use anything that can be validated. The same way a scientist says this is a gold ring or not. Test it, and he puts an acid on it. And if it turns a certain color, he knows how much gold is in it. It's either true or it's not, including the faith. So these predictions and prophecies take place that individual Baha'is are able to do this. They asked the guardian of the faith, Shoghi Effendi, what about the prophecies of Islam, or what about Hinduism, or what about this? You know what he said? He said he left that up to the decision of experts in world religions to come to the conclusion. So in the Baha'i faith, we happen to have a lot of people here in town under the covenant that have decided to become very knowledgeable in the prophecies of these other world religions. And they're able to be scholarly and academic and solid in proving their points. And if they're proven to be wrong later by somebody else that discovers a fact that blows their concept or theory, then a true scientist rejects the hypothesis and then accepts the new reality. And this is how we go forward within the Baha'i faith. Some people were burned out on prophesied dates from me going through dates on the siege of the city, but he hit the nail on the head. And he wrote this letter to Bill Clinton, and he told him you can't try Iraq in the news media. You have to follow due process and international law, and you can't have sanctions on these people. It violates international law, and you can't try people in the news media. Now who's being tried in the news media? Now whose case is before all the people instead of just the courts privately? Him. And they're talking impeachment. The last time they talked impeachment of an American president was Richard Nixon, who was the last president, was when Dr. Opal Jensen wrote to Nixon that her husband had been wrongly incarcerated here in the Montana State Prison on a crime he didn't commit. Being a doctor of natural medicine that was licensed to do gynecology, chiropractic, and obstetrics, he was open to charges like the sex charge Joseph was put in prison on. And he was put out of business by his competitors. But this wound up fulfilling prophecy here in Montana. I personally helped unravel, was a witness to this unraveling, the fact that a group named Morrisites pioneered the Deer Lodge Valley in Montana over 100 years ago, waiting for a man to fulfill prophecy and to be put in prison on a dirty jacket charge that would be descended from the King of Denmark, that would be the establisher for the second coming of Christ. Baha'u'llah, and they called him a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, which is an archaic term for a great teacher that would educate people about world religions. And it all came true. The head of the sociology department here wrote a book on it.
Is Christ coming again? Did you just say that?
Baha'u'llah is the second coming of Christ.
He came already.
Rich, I was raised Jewish. If over 6 million people cannot recognize the first coming of Christ for 2,000 years, what makes you think the Christians can't miss the second coming of Christ for only 150?
Way more than 6 million. There's
Jews worldwide.
Well,
I'm just talking about the Jewish people.
Okay,
because he was promised to appear before them.
Yeah.
Now the second coming of Christ will appear amongst the Christian people, and he is, and they're uneducated.
But he was assassinated, or his son was assassinated?
His grandson, Shoghi Effendi, was assassinated.
Okay.
That it says this whole thing can be explained in the book of Isaiah or Hosea in chapter 4. It says this. This is a quote from God speaking through Hosea. He says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." So if I lack knowledge, I'll be destroyed. Okay? God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't have preference for Neil Chase or anybody else. That people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. The purpose of these prophecies of catastrophe is like a sign on the road that says slippery when wet or bridge out. The reason the sign appears before the event is so you won't drive over the bridge out. And sometimes they even put a guy in front of the sign with big orange flags and lights saying bridge out. And you know what they do? When it's the one from God, they say, hey you, we're not listening to you, and they accelerate, saying we're the civilization God can't sink, we're the ship God can't sink, and they go over that bridge. But that prophecy is given, like that road sign, before the bridge out. So the people will take the detour and maybe get other people together and rebuild the bridge and fix the problem. That's what God's up to. And that's, in these prophecies, none of them have to be fulfilled, but they're all being fulfilled because nobody's listening. Now I've had Baha'is under the covenant come up to me and say, Neil, why'd you write a release saying that all New York City will be nuked with the UN building being the target on March 23rd, 1994? Because I read the passage you're quoting in Ezekiel chapter 4:6. I read it on my own. And God talking to Ezekiel says, siege the city. And then it says, lay on your other side and siege it again. In a siege, once it starts, the city will eventually fall. But it happens in stages. And they said, obviously, these dates pertain to the siege of the city. Why are you saying New York will be nuked? That's not what it says. And I said to this friend of mine, I said, well, you know, you're right, but I don't have a crystal ball. How do I know that they won't fully nuke the city on that date? And according to Ezekiel, it says that if I don't predict and publish, because I happened to discover this on my own reading time, okay? Nobody told me to go read it, or I wasn't told to do this or that, but when I was reading it, I saw this. And then it said, if you don't warn the people from what you've been shown or what you've discovered, then if the wicked people die and you don't warn them, their blood will be on your head. But if you warn the wicked people, wicked means not using the intellect, and they die, then their blood won't be on your head. And so I said, I don't have a crystal ball. So that's why I warned them on that. And if I do my job good enough, warning them about this prophecy I saw, the prophecy won't be fulfilled for the catastrophe. And I might be ridiculed and humiliated as predicting something that didn't come true, but I'd be quite happy to see the whole world peaceably lay down its weapons, maybe at my personal expense for making a public spectacle out of something that I saw. And I really wouldn't think the people that would do that would hold it against me. The trick here is the prophecy paradox, Rich. People that believe in this type of prophecy take it serious and prevent the catastrophe and accept the one that fulfills prophecy. People that see that the person claims to fulfill prophecy and don't believe in prophecy, don't believe in the prophecy of the catastrophe either, and then the catastrophe prophecy is fulfilled. But if they did believe in prophecy, they would accept the one that fulfills prophecy by name, date, address, and mission prophesied, and then they would accept the prophecy of the catastrophe and prevent that one from being fulfilled. And that's the paradox. If they don't believe it, the negative one's fulfilled. If they do believe it, the negative one's not fulfilled. And that's the history of it. Jesus said this generation would see Jerusalem destroyed, and it was. Now, who's to blame? There's somebody to blame. The Jewish leadership. The Jewish people are wonderful people, very spiritual, very nice people. The individual sans guardian Baha'i Zamit, wonderful people. I don't have any problem with that. And it's America. They can believe whatever they want religiously. I have freedom from their religion of covenant breaking, but I have freedom of my religion. They have freedom of theirs. You know, and they can have freedom from the truth too if they don't like that religion, a religion that holds truth to be important. And God is no respecter of person. They don't have to believe in that. It's America. But when the Jewish leaders had people in the audience cry out for Barabbas and paid them to do this, the majority of Jewish people didn't know what was going on. The first apostles were Jewish. Jesus was Jewish from the tribe of Judah. So Jewish people didn't kill Christ, but the leadership, Caiaphas and Annas and Herod and the Roman leadership, that they was able to orchestrate the death of this great personage. And when this happened, the situation so evolved that prophecy was fulfilled that 40 years later, Titus came in and wiped out Jerusalem and hacked the innocent men, women, and children up into little chunks and sold the remnant as slaves. That's history. Now, these poor innocent people did not deserve to be hacked into bits, and this is a crime against humanity that Rome committed on these people, and it's a travesty of justice. But why did they die? Because of Christ? Because of their wicked leaders that they followed. The blood of these people is on their hands. Now, these people that were slaughtered, they might go straight to heaven for all I know. But when they go there, or when they get into the next life, they see their leaders. They said, you did this to us. And their leaders migrate to the nethermost gloom. The Native Americans had a vision with Lavoca in Idaho. And he saw the second coming of Christ. He had a vision of Baha'u'llah while Baha'u'llah was in the world. And Native Americans became believers in this. And it started the ghost dance. And he appointed Sitting Bull to be the high priest of this ghost dance religion. And he was Lakota Sioux. They had a prophecy of the birth of the white buffalo. Well, Sitting Bull went up north and met Louis Riel, which is from the Montana area, that helped establish the province of Manitoba. And his people were wiped out by the first use of the Gatling gun against anybody in history. And he accepted this also. He was also later killed. And so the division rose amongst the ghost dance people. And some of the Sioux hijacked the ghost dance religion and started making ghost dance t-shirts and saying that the white man's bullets couldn't hurt you if you wore this special ghost dance shirt. And what happened? Everybody hears about Wounded Knee, an atrocity, a crime against humanity. The Lakota Sioux themselves, and I met Sitting Bull's great-grandson. He told me this himself in Mobridge, South Dakota, when I spoke with him at the fire that night. What he told me during a covenant-breaking charade that was being pulled. And he told me, and this is in history, that the Lakota leaders of the other ghost dance faction assassinated Sitting Bull. They killed the one in charge of the true vision of the ghost dance. They did it to their own guy, their own leader. Sitting Bull claimed he was the last Native American in the continent, and then he was killed. Right after this, the American troops came in and wiped out the people that killed Sitting Bull and all their innocent followers. And the blood of those innocent followers is on the hands of those that killed Sitting Bull. Had Sitting Bull lived, he would have attended the International Religious Conference in 1893 or 96, where the Baha'i faith was first proclaimed in America, and he would have accepted it. And the Native Americans would have entered the Baha'i faith en masse at that time. But this was prevented from happening.
And they would have maintained their own cultural
That's right.
things.
It's unity through diversity. And they would have had the right to self-government. But Lavoca said he's in the world now. He's not white. He's not Native American. He's neither from the East or the West. And they drew pictures of this descendant of David, which was from Persia. When Malcolm X was in his prison cell, he had a vision of somebody that wasn't black and wasn't white. And at some point, he thought this was Elijah Muhammad. Then he found out when he went to Mecca that Elijah Muhammad said that you can't be with the white man. But Muhammad and the Muslims, having been exposed to Baha'u'llah way before the 1960s, and even before this, they have people of different races all praying next to each other. Malcolm X came back transformed. And he said this was not Elijah Muhammad that he had a vision of. I think it was Abdul-Baha or Baha'u'llah that he saw in this vision. And then what Malcolm X did, he goes, this is not a civil rights issue like my great compatriot Martin Luther King thinks. He says, this is a human rights issue. I'm going to go to the United Nations, Malcolm X said, and he was legal-minded, could have been a lawyer, and file a human rights violation charge against the United States of America for what they've done to the black man. And then he was assassinated. So they didn't want this type of charge. The General Assembly would have passed it. Did you know, Rich, right now, the General Assembly of the United Nations forbids any country to have nuclear weapons? It's an international law. No one country is to have nuclear weapons. The Security Council in the United States in violation of the General Assembly. So this house of the Lord that all the nations will flow to is written from the prophecy of Isaiah in stone, called the Isaiah Stone, in front of the UN building. The Roosevelts knew about the Baha'i faith. Before them, Woodrow Wilson's daughter was a Baha'i, and he set up the League of Nations. And before him, the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas, and Alexander were Baha'is. They set up the World Court. World history has been changed by Baha'u'llah from prison, writing to these world leaders, telling them about the coming of this world order from God. And different groups have imitated it and tried to set up their own type of world order, which is tyranny. Now, peace on earth without justice is tyranny. But we're going to have peace on earth with justice. Now, if people knew the reality of these things, they'd be in a better position to buy their car. More people spend more time trying to figure out the stats on their car than they do about choosing what religion is true or what way of life is true. Now, people that are spiritually inclinated, they don't want to be bossed around spiritually. Baha'u'llah says, and therefore the average Joe shouldn't be able to go against this, that the councils are over matters of state. Matters of worship is between the individual person and God, the way they see it. So the purpose of this is we have God having an authoritative figure stating this, so that if a group tried to violate that, the majority could stand up with that documentation too and feel perfectly right in defending their rights and not worry about going against this. So the problem is with Kingdom of God is that the atrocities against humanity have been done by kings and by church states. Every kingship in Europe that claimed divine right of kings, Rich, bogusly claims a lineage to King David. The King of England, the Habsburgs in Spain and Germany, and Hitler figured he could have the spear of destiny and he would be the one. Well, they say he was part Jewish, which means he's part from the tribe of Judah. So why kill the Jews? They don't know David comes from the tribe of Judah, King David. Which Jew, which means from the tribe of Judah, is the single person of all Jews that's the heir to the throne of David. So kill them all. Kill the competition.
Just like Bethlehem.
Exactly. This is why Herod did this. Now, people thought the Bethlehem slaughter was fictitious because they couldn't find archaeological records of the slaughter of babies. Just recently, the archaeologists, they were looking in Jerusalem, went to Bethlehem and found a mass grave of infants and some still in their mother's wombs with sword wounds breaking their bones. And they found the slaughter of infants spoken of historically in the Bible. So there's history there. The whole Bible's not the Word of God. There's history, there's the wars of the Jews, but every now and then there's a passage that says, this is the word of the Lord, and it gives a prophecy. Now what that means, it says in Peter that no prophecy of Scripture is a matter of one's own private interpretation, but authoritative ones from God give their correct meaning. So how do we determine if somebody's authoritative from God or not? Not according to Baha'u'llah, not according to Jesus, to Dr. Leland Jensen, not according to Muhammad, or Buddha or Krishna, but according to Jesus Christ. He claimed that he fulfilled prophecy. This whole concept of prophecy fulfillment comes from the New Testament being attached to the Old Testament. It's purely Jesus Christ's interpretation of the Old Testament. Now take it or leave it. Ironically, it's the Christian majority, so-called, that don't accept, when you actually read the Scripture, Jesus' own New Testament interpretation of the prophecies in the Old Testament. That's what got to me. I felt like a Roman in the time of Jesus with Paul coming to me saying, how come the Jews don't accept Jesus? Here's his book. I was not raised Christian. Wasn't even raised Jewish. My parents came out of grandparents came out of communist Russia. My parents are 100% American, but the atheism of Marx took away religion. When they saw me reading the Scripture, they were like, what's he doing? And I said, well, what's this Christianity thing about? The majority's Christian. Now, sure, the majority can be wrong, but this is pretty unusual. I want to read the book. So I did. And some things made sense and some things didn't. I talked to a lot of Christians, and I had to go against the flack of some of my parents or family, that was Orthodox, says oh my God, it's a cult. He's going to fall into Christianity. He might become a Catholic or a Protestant or a Seventh-day Adventist. There was a person here recently who was complaining that their son had been captured in a cult. Says, my son, he's fallen into a cult. He's become a Mooney. And the other person at the table was, how terrible. And they were Japanese. They said, my son Ichi, they've fallen into a cult too. She says, that's horrible. What is it? He says, they become Presbyterian. So it depends upon the standpoint of this. Now, my upbringing, they didn't even say God existed. Now, if God's a crutch, when my leg is healthy, I don't want a crutch. And I know that if I keep using a crutch, my leg ain't never going to get healthy. I want to be healthy and independent. So if God's just a crutch and it's fake, I don't want to be involved in that. I don't think any thinking person does. Or if religion's a crutch or this or that, because then your leg atrophies or whatever it is. You never heal. Now, if there is a creator of the universe and it happens to just be true, well, that's nice. I want to know more about that. That's different. See? This becomes interesting. See? Now, throughout history, there's proofs and evidences for the existence of a creator. Our Industrial Revolution comes from Islam. Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci and these Renaissance people got a revelation that was both. Do you know why Newton did all of his calculus and astronomy work and gravity? He wanted to prove that the prophecies in the Scripture, they don't give years. They say a time, like an orbit of the Earth. There'll be 1,260 times. The Earth will orbit the sun 1,260 times. Or from this date, from this event, there will be 490 years or times to this other event. Well, they said, how can anybody possibly know when the edict from Artaxerxes was issued? Because that's ancient history. We're talking like 500 BC. And then Jesus was somewhere around 30 AD, maybe he was born in 4 BC. How can anybody know? So Isaac Newton spent day and night coming up with gravitational astronomy with his calculus to accurately predict solar and lunar eclipses. And he was, and the other ones were able to demonstrate from this science that they recurred regularly, because just due to the continuous motion of things, the moon would interpose between the sun and the earth. Well, in the star charts of Ptolemy, the records of the Chinese, and all the ancient chronicles, they date the years of the kings. They're all into astronomy, and they would always say on this day of this year of the reign of the king, a solar eclipse occurred, or a lunar eclipse occurred. So they cranked back the celestial clock, and they found the solar and lunar eclipses, and they found out that the edict of Artaxerxes, when they added up the reigns of the kings, that the first day of the first year of the 7th year of Artaxerxes, spoken of in Ezra 7:11, which is a copy of a cuneiform stone tablet the archaeologists found in later on, you know. So we've got, it says it's a copy here, and they found the original even. And it says that's March 21st, 457 BC. We add 490 years to that. Newton writes in his paper from 1600, we get 34 AD, March 21st, on the vernal equinox. Look at that, another solar eclipse took place, that's it. See? And he proved that. Well, then the prophecy for the second coming said there'd be 2,300 evenings and mornings. So they just, the Christians that knew this, just added the 2,300 to the same starting point. They got March 21st, 1844. So the social science department talks about prophecy failure. And the majority of Americans on March 21st, 1844 were up in the mountains of Pennsylvania waiting for the second coming of Christ to come down out of the sky and the dead to come out of the tombs, and they would rapture, and nothing happened. So they say prophecy failure. But on that date, the Baha'i era began in the East and the start of the Baha'i calendar. So Baha'is that became educated don't see that as prophecy failure. They see it as prophecy fulfillment. These people fulfill prophecy, not expectations. Jesus did not fulfill expectations. He fulfilled prophecy. They expected, like David slew Goliath, somebody to come and slay the Roman Empire and set the Jewish leadership up in ascendancy. But he came to spiritualize them. They didn't want that. And so he was crucified, fulfilling prophecy, to be cut off, that is, crucified on that date. And this is the type of proof that Christianity is funded on. But no church teaches that. No church tells you the reason we should be Christian is because of this prophecy. Thousands of years after the fact, they become great and we accept them. But missing the mark, the sin of missing the mark is how to recognize them when they're there in your lifetime. And so we have to independently investigate the truth. The Baha'i faith is not about Armageddon and all these predictions and press releases for the catastrophe. It's the medicine for the sick world. And there's benefits for the individual as far as talks about the evolution of the soul, spiritual qualities and attributes, natural medicine, books and epistles. But Persians like shorthand, so you could write as fast as you could talk. And so he has an extensive writing. Anybody has access to these writings in the original language. Now, when they do a translation into English academically, like a little Buddhist writing or a paragraph from the Mahabharata, you know what they have to do? They have to take the Sanskrit word or the Persian word or whatever, and every possible definition it has in that language and context. Then they have to create every possible English equivalent of that. Then they have to write a paragraph or two defending why they're picking this translation of the word on that deal. Then they have to prove their case, and then they can translate that one word. Then they go to the next word. And so a translation of one paragraph that, let's say, would have 100 words in it, would be, each word would have maybe 3 pages or more written on it. The history of the word, the etymology of the word, the cultural diverse usage of the word, the time the piece was written, the time, the way the word was used then. And this is how they validate that. In the Baha'i faith, the guardian cannot translate the Baha'i writings or interpret them. It has to be done in the method that I just said and voted on by a unanimous or majority decision of a local council or national or otherwise. While Abdul-Baha was still alive, the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant, they wanted to translate something he wrote into English. He said, take it to the council and have them vote on it. And he stayed out of it. So this is a quite different scenario than the church state of the Middle Ages. It's a scenario, a world government, where when the new prophet comes in 1,000 years, maybe the Baha'is won't accept him, and we'll have the same test again. But the government won't be the one crucifying him, see? Because that person will have the right to prove that maybe they fulfill this prophecy or they're from God, and individuals won't be able to turn to the government or the priest and say, does he? They'll have to decide on their own. We're born alone. We die alone. We decide about God during our lifetimes alone. And that's how it is. And it ain't that tough, because there's a lot of proofs and evidences and a contract, Rich, is not valid under duress. This is the main problem with catastrophe thinking. All these Christian ministers and doomsayers tell us that there's an Armageddon scenario or a catastrophe, or the end of the world or something like this. They get the individual that might feel inferior or vulnerable in a state of scared. They feel like the only safe place is under the umbrella of that minister or charismatic leader, and they come underneath them, and then they control them for this, that, or the other thing. And legally, a contract's not valid under duress. So God doesn't validate a covenant or a contract under duress. An individual has to have the time to calmly look at the facts, make a decision, test the case, compare the scenario how Jesus claimed he fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. Look at the people that were for him and against him and the mistakes they made. Jesus called Peter Satan. You get behind me, O Satan. So Peter made mistakes too. So whether they said they were with him or not, there were mistakes there. See? Or maybe Jesus is kook, for saying something like that. Make your choice, but be fair and see how it played out in history. And on that standard, not of man, but that God gave, compare what Baha'u'llah or the Baha'is are saying Baha'u'llah fulfills, or his establisher, Dr. Jensen. That's the only standard we could compare it to. If somebody says they've seen an angel or a vision, like John on the island of Patmos said he had a vision he wrote down Revelations. Our best modern scientists tell us he most likely has a chemical imbalance, psychotic, schizophrenic. They used to call it a dementia precox or something like this. See? So therefore, if this person's a nut, anybody else coming in contact with this vision that comes from the psychopathological would then also suffer psychopathological. So Jesus claimed he heard voices like a voice from heaven. So John was his most beloved disciple, believed in Jesus very firmly. So when he was in prison, he had a nervous breakdown and he wrote down the book of Revelation, or he was on mushrooms or something. So you have these theories and concepts. That could be true. It could just all be a bunch of visionary or wackadoodle or something, just nut bar stuff. We don't know. Anybody can claim they had a vision or something like this, or they see this in the stars or this in the cards or something like that. We don't know. Can we go by this or not? Do we use a gut feeling? What do we do? Okay. The other case scenario, which I'll just conclude this with, is that it could be based on an inferiority complex. Moses was going to be the next Pharaoh, but then he accidentally killed somebody when he found out he wasn't from the Egyptian lineage, but he was a Hebrew, which is like a black man in the South in America. Killed a white man. Then he tried to break up two Hebrews fighting, and they said, what are you going to do, kill us like you killed the Egyptian? So he goes off in the desert, suffers an inferiority complex because the Pharaoh of Egypt was God on earth. So Moses concocts another God greater than Pharaoh being God on earth. And now Moses is the representative of this new invisible God. And now Moses is more powerful than Pharaoh, and he goes back and overcompensates his inferiority complex. And this is the birth of Judaism. When poor suckers like Isaiah and Daniel get involved in this, they then suffer psychotic breakdowns and dementia precox, which they write down in visions. And they walk around like basket cases. That's a possibility. Another possibility is there's a real reality behind the scenes. And the way the scientist uses his intellect to investigate reality and bring forth invisible frameworks and laws that puts a man on the moon, these spiritual giants come close to the revelators of the spiritual world, and they receive a truth discovery, which they then promote. And that some people are able to recognize this by proofs and evidences. Jesus based his religion on the visions of Daniel and Ezekiel and the prophecies of Moses. This validates a real prophecy type reality behind the scenes. Therefore, if we come in closer contact with this, we're approaching the same direction we would be in a scientific search. This would benefit the progress of the individual. This, of course, is my belief on the case, that these individuals are from God. There is a scientific spiritual reality behind the scenes that all of us as individuals have complete access to, that will also result in psychic and spiritual phenomena amongst all of us. Because you said, what's God's plan? It says on the first page, Rich, let us make man in our image, that we're to be in the image of God. That's what it says in the Bible. Meaning intelligent, loving, spiritual, just, kind, merciful, and these things. Not all this war and stuff. At that point, I don't even care. Only thing I want government for, Rich, is to deliver my mail and make sure the other people are driving on the left side of the road or the right when I'm driving the other way to get across town. Now, I don't need much more government than that. See? And that I'm interested in other things. I mean, I don't really understand math and science and physics and music and harmonies and biology and all these other things. And I'm not some super genius or something like this. Every little kid is why? They're all little creatures. Why? And when they're born, they cry. And the parent says, shut up, you're making noise. And they grow up stunted and muted. And they feel inferior. The parents would be like a 40-foot giant to a little kid. So there's a natural tendency to feel inferior. But the kid dedicated to the parent, loves the parent, and the parent treats it mean, it grows up warped. And it gets villainized. This has to stop. And the real problems with our treatment of our youth. American government hates children. They killed those children in Waco. They're killing the children in Iraq. They're closing Roosevelt School. The government, if it was a person doing those things, hates kids. It's against the children. When Baha'u'llah said he heard the cries of the children, he tripled or doubled their inheritance if somebody died intestate and the state was to divide up the wealth. He doubled that. You don't have to go by that. You can write your own will or do something else. But anyway, some of these things are just advice, like drinking or pot. You want to do that? Maybe Baha'u'llah says it's advice, because he said, why would somebody take something that steals away their reason? Maybe it's just advice. He doesn't give a punishment for it. Doesn't say you can't be a Baha'i if you do it. Now, I don't want somebody that's doing that operating on my liver while they're intoxicated. If I found out, I'm going to go to somebody that's sober. Now, if other people want to go to them while they're in that state and get an operation, as far as I'm still concerned, that's their business to a degree. And I mean, I believe in very little government intervention in people's lives. And in the Baha'i system, the government is local. It's locally based. It's not internationally based. It's unity through diversity. For instance, sex laws. Take Hawaiians. Hawaiian kings and queens were brother and sister for thousands of years. When the Christians went there, they said it's an incest, and they wrecked those people and made them go underground. Baha'u'llah's only thing he forbids is a son to marry his father's wives. He says everything else is up to the house of justice. Well, I'm not trying to put forth that I'm in favor of brothers and sisters getting married of the same family. But I'll tell you this. I'm not going to go to Borneo and wreck some primitive culture that's been based on that for like 10,000 years or something, or destroy Hawaii. Give them a break. If that's what they're doing, just leave them alone. You know, if they're in Hawaii and they're doing that, leave those people alone. See?
Why didn't we learn this before we destroyed Hawaiian culture?
You know what, Rich? I think if you would have been in charge of the situation there, that Hawaii wouldn't have been destroyed. I think that if a lot of people here were actually in charge, that a lot of these things wouldn't happen. And I got a letter from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Wiesenthal, Nazi hunter. You know what it says on the front of that? Evil only wins when good people do nothing. And that's the problem. We've got good people that would never think of being active. See? We don't need activist groups and standing activist charities getting government grants. What we need is Minutemen activists, that when somebody rises up and says they're going to close the school, somehow the army of people show up at the school, and maybe a core of people organize that event. When that event's over, there's no more leaders. If somebody else discovers something, different leaders are elected to do a different event. But we do need some people permanently there for the mail and plowing the streets, and they can be elected yearly.
See, now we have specific things we can talk about, but we can't do it tonight. Listeners, this is what happens when you listen to Neil Chase. You just learn all kinds of interesting things, and the time goes by, and it's a worldview.
Take a trip to another place. If we could sum our message up into one sentence, this is the last thing I'm going to say.
Okay.
The descendant of King David must be the president of this International Baha'i Council, this world government.
Then God will be happy about it.
So we can recognize the true council from fakes, frauds, and imitations. That's the reason why.
So there has to be that acceptance, that level of devotion.
It's a sign. That there's a sign. Now, this descendant of David open for adoption and appointment. It could be a legal son. It doesn't have to be physical. So it's not confined to one tribe or people.
Well, there's so many facets of all of this, but we've got to be done. It's 2 o'clock. I've never done this thing for so long on the radio.
Well, I've got one more thing to say, Rich, and I want to.
You get to.
Okay, thanks.
And
it doesn't matter what I believe or what anybody believes, but that we have millennial fever. And it's the governments that at these prophesied dates have waged war. In 1000 AD, the governments had a crusade and slaughtered the European Jews. In 1260, the Jews were killed because the European governments didn't know who had the throne of David. In 1290, the King of England expelled all Jews from England. That's a prophesied date. In 1335, same thing. These are the dates Marco Polo went to find the Khan, looking for the kingdom on earth. Columbus came to America looking for this, and he added the 490 to 1000, and he got 1490. And when he left in 1492, the Spanish Inquisition started. We're approaching the year 2000. These international bankers are religious. They believe in these prophecies. Is a date coming that there's going to be a slaughter of a lot of people by these rogues, and this is what they believe. This is what they've done historically. And it's because they feel that they need to win. Netanyahu then went and talked to Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell after Clinton. Americans believe and know historically that whoever has controlled Jerusalem has ruled the world. You can't separate religion from the political scene. And therefore, they will fight on the side of Israel because they feel that Israel always won a war when it fought on the side of God. So if America fights on the side of Israel and the Jewish people, they will feel they will win. But Israel only won all their wars when they fought on the side of King David. And today, this Jewish state is not on the side of the descendant of King David. And not Israel's not, and neither is America. And they're going to go in with this new nuclear strategy and nuke Iraq. We're going to watch this happen while the sex scandal's happening and obliterate them. And they're gambling that the prophecy won't happen, that these people retaliate and nuke New York. But it'll happen, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it won't be the end of the world. And there's going to be maelstrom and panic, and nobody's going to be listening to reason at that time. There's going to be very few people that are going to stay in the eye of the storm and not get caught up in these 10,000-mile-an-hour four winds of destruction that are held back at the River Euphrates. And I don't care if the Chinese and Russian forces occupy this country the way Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon occupied Israel. Jeremiah told the people that they broke the covenant that God gave. The founding fathers set up our American covenant on Thursday on Thanksgiving to honor the treaty and covenant with the Native Americans. They broke every single one of them. And this is a nation of covenant-breaking Americans that are breaking their Constitution, and God sees it. What I've been describing here tonight is there's a real power behind civilization, that when we say we'll give our word and then we break it, God sees this. And that when a government makes a contract and they break it, there's a real creator that sees it. And we're going against the natural karma of things. And Jesus said, the bread you cast on the water comes back to you. If you're a Baha'i and you break your covenants, you're not going to be spared. If I break mine, I won't be spared. And so America's broken theirs, the covenants their founding fathers made, and they ain't going to be spared. And the only way out for them is to stop breaking it, stick to international law, and follow due process to get us out of this crisis.
And there's an admonition to people like me to my silence. If I know that people shouldn't be prejudiced and that people should be good to each other, stuff like that, and if I'm silent about that, that means I'm culpable.
That's the law. Yeah, that's the law. It's a teaching. It's an ordinance.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rich, for opening up the lines.
Well, I can tell that there's like a wealth unspoken, so we'll see what happens about that. I don't know. I don't feel finished, but I'm gonna let myself feel good. Here's a song.